That
The
would
better setup.
Yeah.
Sitting with you, sitting. I'm
Huh.
like, I don't like this having my August 1st, 2024 Athens-Clarke County Planning Commission meeting. For those of you viewing the meeting remotely, you will find the meeting agenda on the Planning Department website at accgov.com/plan. For those of you attending in person, on the table by the door where you came in, you will find copies of today's agenda as well as a sign-in sheet for those wishing to present public comment. For each agenda item, we will begin with a report from ACC planning staff, which will be followed by a presentation by the applicant, not to exceed 10 minutes. We will then hear from members of the public wishing to comment for or in opposition to a proposal. 3 minutes are allowed for any member of the public who wishes to address the planning commission. When addressing the commission, please provide your name, your address, and the nature of your interest in the project, and direct your comments to the planning commission and not to the applicants. The audience is instructed to refrain from applauding or jeering the speakers. Exhibits may be displayed by the applicants or by members of the public at the podium. Written correspondence received by noon yesterday has been forwarded to the planning commission and is part of the public record. Any additional written materials to be placed into the record must be read during public comment within the 3-minute time limit. For all speakers, please pay attention to the timing device near the podium. The device will display a yellow warning light when you have 30 seconds left, and then a red light when your time is up. After the public comment period, the applicant or their representative may request a 2-minute response, and after that, the applicant will take their seat in the audience. At that point, the public portion for the agenda item will be closed, and the planning commission will proceed to discuss the item. We will receive no additional public or applicant comments unless requested by a planning commissioner. And finally, please note that the microphones in this room are sensitive and that the meeting is being broadcast live. Please turn off or silence your cell phones. So with that, we will proceed to the agenda. The first item under general business on our agenda is introduction of staff reports and other documents submitted to the planning at this meeting into the official record. Do I have a motion?
Yes, move to.
Okay. Motion by Sarah, second by Kristen. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Item 2 is approval of the June 27th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting minutes. Motion approved by Sarah, second by Kristen. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And then item 3, May courts review and public comment. Do we have any May courts?
We have our final 30-day public comment period for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is our this is the 2050 MTP. So it's about a 25, 30-year plan. And the projects that have been narrowed down by the technical committee are what they're looking for comments on at this time before it gets hopefully endorsed and adopted by the May Courts board. Before it all has to be done before the beginning of October. So this is that final window. If folks want to make comments on that, it's up and available on the May Courts website.
Is there any member of the audience here wishing to comment on the May court? Okay, we will proceed to the old business section of the agenda and begin with item 1, 215 Shady Brook Drive. And we'll start with the staff report.
Okay, good evening, Planning Commission. This first case is at 215 Shady Brook Drive, SUP 2024-05-0927. We are looking at a rezone from RS8 to RM1. RS8 is our single-family residential zone, and RM1 is our mixed-density residential zone. They have submitted a concept plan, which is non-binding under the rezone, although the applicant has offered to bind it. You'll see in your packet, there's a few reasons why staff does not suggest doing that. They're looking to connect to this parcel, which I'll show you here in just a second, through the Willow Mist neighborhood, which is off of Seagraves Drive. The front part of Seagraves Drive is public, where there are the single family structures, the duplex and the small apartment building. And then it crosses the creek into the duplex subdivision of Willow Mist, where it becomes private, where this project will connect into. They do have a proposed future connection through to the Lakewood Plan Development. You will see that a little later this evening. That's our last item. However, the existing plan development there has a structure, so has no impact on the later one as much as they're looking to finally, kind of see both of these through at this time. They are proposing 60 dwellings on the property. They are detached dwellings. They are also looking to have a clubhouse, a play area, and an overlook because there's quite a bit of topo on this site and lots of old forest as well on this site. And then lastly, they're looking to include a nature trail that goes along the creek on this site. And that trail has the potential to be a part of the future Greenway connection, which does show a connection through this portion of the community. So lastly, the property was before you all a few months ago, had an issue with the access for a multifamily project over 250 trips per day. They have since gone to the hearings board and received a variance for that request. So that variance allows them to go down to the single access point. So here is Shady Brook, 215 Shady Brook. Shady Brook is actually this street up here. The creek runs along here and comes into Lake Deacle. This would be the Lakewood Plan Development down here. A lot of topography falling towards that creek. You can see some of the shadows on the Lakewood property there. And that's why the access off of Shady Brook was not working out for the applicant. They were looking to possibly install a very extensive bridge network that Transportation and Public Works did not see suitable for a project with just 60 dwelling units. So they have since found an opportunity to connect through Seagraves Drive and Willow Mist. There's a little stub right here that allows them to connect. And then they're also looking for emergency connection right here. I'll show you on the site plan. And then you'll also see that possible future connection to the Lakewood Plan Development. You can see along here, we do have some existing multifamily out in this area. This is off of Lexington Road. Right here, if you drive out, is Athens, where the new traffic light and the multifamily development is. Willow Mist being multifamily, mix of multifamily and single family along there, but a lot of streets, as you can see going back, that just are sort of in without a lot of access. So really hoping to get some connections in this area of town as a lot of growth has been going on along Lexington Road. You can see here that it is traditional neighborhood for the future land use. They're looking to keep that the same. Then here is the zoning request. So RS8, which is what is along the front of Shady Brook there. And then they're looking to go to RM1, which is a little bit more in line with Athens, some of the other properties accessed off of Gaines School Road. And then also a little bit in line with the mixed use development there at Lakewood. So I've flipped around the view on you here and I've had to cut these two together from our ortho, but just kind of wanted to give you a view. You can again see a bit of the topography as it falls towards the front here. The property line actually cuts along the creek right here. This is an old parcel map. And then you can see the connection into the Willow Mist subdivision there. So again, thought we'd rotate one more time on you guys just to make it fun. So we've got Willow Mist down here at the bottom, the two connections in. The creek that runs along there, you can see these topo lines up here very close together, means a pretty steep slope. And then we've got the potential connection into Lakewood up the top there. This is actually the end of Shady Brook right here, if you can see. So that roadway bridge connection is what we're looking to hopefully avoid by this. And I believe the applicant thinks that this solution of coming through Willow Mist is the best opportunity for them to continue to develop. So staff finds this is partially compatible with the 2023 comprehensive plan. This is some infill development here on this site. Does have some increase to the housing supply. As with many of these cases you've heard from us, we're looking for change and flexibility in that housing supply. They are looking to provide one type of housing product here. They are looking at a few alley access parcels along with a few front access parcels on this, or structures. They actually aren't creating parcels on this, my apology. Do find it to be compatible with the future land use map, the zoning map, and the ordinances. That last bullet point I thought was removed off there. I apologize for that. They have addressed that issue through the variance process. And so staff is recommending approval with conditions. The two conditions we are looking to cert on this property is that the voluntary binding plan shall be used as a reference only and not included as part of this approval process. And then secondly, that any access through a private roadway requires recording of an access easement. So that would be all the way out Seagraves Drive from the 2 points of access that they're showing on their plan. And with that, we'll conclude the staff report, and I can leave this up here for your benefit.
Thank you, Mark. Is there any member of the public here wishing to speak in favor of this proposal? Oh, I'm so sorry. First, we'll hear from the applicant.
I do count as the public too, so arguably. Thank you. My name is Ken Bell, Bell and Company. And our firm, we live at 1041 Lake Wellbrook Drive, Athens, Georgia. And I'm representing Kittle Construction, Mr. Ronnie Kittle, who's also here in the blue shirt there. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have about this development. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I want to thank the planning staff for what I consider to be a very positive staff report concerning the rezone request. We originally started having meetings about this about 1.5 years ago, and we presented an earlier rezone request. That's the one that illustrated the bridge location. But after meeting with Public Works Department on multiple occasions, their recommendation to us was, if possible, try to find an alternative route for your second access. Because the Public Works Department didn't think that a project with this few number of lots would justify the maintenance expense of the bridge that would have to be built to serve the project. So, and it was going to be a very expensive bridge. So his desire to have an alternative location for access to the property that might be less costly was certainly something that we wanted to look into. So we met on multiple occasions with Ronnie Katrib at the Public Transportation Public Works Department, with members of the Athens-Clarke County Water and Sewer Department and members of the Athens-Clarke County Planning Department. Ultimately came up with this alternative plan. And I think everyone from every department is much happier with this plan than the original plan that we submitted. I just have a couple of comments concerning items in the staff report. On page 2 of the report, there are 2 conditions. We have no problems. The owner has no problems with either of those 2 conditions. The first one is about the voluntary binding site plan. Just some background. We offered to make this a binding site plan. Let me back up a little bit. When we met with the former planning director and showed him what our client wanted to do on the property, he suggested that because of some limitations that exist on the RS8 zoning classification, which is what we originally presented to the planning staff, there are restrictions on what you can count as buildable area. There are restrictions on where you can place your driveways, and there are restrictions on having to do mass grading on the site, one limit of clearing line to the next. And this site is just such an environmentally sensitive site. He recommended that we might want to consider an RM1 zoning classification, which does not have those limitations. And so we followed his advice and presented this plan. And it is a very beautiful property. It's old growth hardwood trees for the most part. We're preserving at least 1/3 of the property from the highest point down to the creek where the grades are so steep. We're preserving the environmental corridors, the 25-foot state waters buffer, the 50-foot environmental corridor buffer, and the floodplain, all of those, with the exception of the nature trail and the crossing of the stream with a water interconnection to the recently completed 8-inch water line that was built in the Shady Brook development. I think it was finished about 60 days ago. With those exceptions, we're not disturbing any of those environmental areas with this plan. So but back on the binding site plan, there may be minor modifications to the way the road width, for instance, might need to be wider to accommodate a water line. But we were happy with the general layout of the roads, the layout of where the units are proposed, and the layout of those roads and how the houses would fit in there. So in that regard, and the maximum number of 60 units, we were happy to be willing to have a binding site plan. We're okay with it not being binding, but we want you to know the reason why we were willing for it to be a binding site plan, even though it's not necessarily going to be. There is one item in the staff report that I would like to mention. On page 5 of your report, under water and sewer availability, the first line reads, ACC water is not available. A water main extension is required. And the second line says ACC sewer is not available and a sewer main extension is required. Well, part of those, both of those statements are true and a part of both of those is false. As of a letter that I received from the ACC Public Utilities Department on June the 7th, we do have water availability and we do have sewer availability. The letter says, as of this date, the Athens-Clarke County water system and sanitary sewer system do have capacity available to serve the proposed development with water and sanitary sewer based on the above referenced demands. So I just call that to your attention for clarification. We do in fact have both of those things. But the second part of both of those is true. We do have to extend the water main to the property because it's currently located in Seagraves Drive, which the petitioner owns that property, but it doesn't physically touch what we're rezoning to RM1. So we do have to extend it and then extend it through to the site. Now, the sewer line that we'll be tapping also is the property that he currently owns on Seagraves Drive. But we will have to do a sewer extension to get through his existing property and provide an easement therewith and easements throughout the property because they're private. They're going to be private streets to serve the development. So I'm probably getting close to my time. That's all I have to say, other than I appreciate the favorable recommendation, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have at any time.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. If any of the planning commissioners have questions during our discussion, we may ask you to return to the podium.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll hear public comment. Is there any member of the public here wishing to speak in support of this proposal?
I'm Mac Duncan. I live at 2600 Lexington Road. And the 23 acres that Mr. Kittle has was part of 44 acres that my family had there. And my parents bought the bulk of that property in 1943. And so it's been our private nature preserve for a long, long time. We moved out there when I was 8 in 1954. And I lived there until 1968 when I graduated and left town for 40 years and moved back in 2009, and I live in the family home. And Mr. Kittle's project is our backyard. Our property's on the other side of that creek to the north. I am in favor of this. two points. We zoned RS8. 16 of the acres were developable by the equation I was led to understand. Under RS8, he would be able to have 60 or 61 homes. That's what he's proposing. So even though we didn't want to sell the property, family needed to sell it. We knew that this is what would probably occur on it. So this is what we expected and hoped for. Secondly, we also expected he'd have to come in on Shady Brook Drive. And to make that connection from the end of Shady Brook Drive up to the upper part of the property is over 100 feet of elevation. And it's going through really pretty area, shoals on the creek there, legacy forest there. It was there in 1938. So the fact that he was able to get the variance and not have to come through Shady Brook appealed to me. My wife and I also own a house on Shady Brook, one of the 11 houses. Pretty sure I speak for all the Shady Brook people. We're very happy that that bridge isn't there. So again, I'm in favor of what Mr. Kittle is proposing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Is there any other member of the public here wishing to speak in support? Is there any member of the public here to speak in opposition? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Bell, I assume you don't need a rebuttal.
I'm good.
So we'll bring our discussion behind the rail. Who wants to start us off?
I think it's a question for staff. I just want to make sure I understand why you all don't want or need a binding site plan. Why are you recommending against that?
I mean, a good majority, well, flexibility is something we in the planning department support quite a bit of. But a little bit more of the technical aspects of transportation public works. We don't have full roadway geometry
Okay.
and stormwater settled at this point, which we do not require. So that's quite often the case when we've got really interesting topography like this, that transportation public works wants to have that flexibility in the plan review process to make sure the roads can be put in a safe manner.
I have a kind of related question, just regarding the meaning of the first condition in the staff report. It says the voluntary binding plan shall be used as reference only and not included as part of the approval of the rezoning request. Does that mean anything different from there is no binding plan? When you say it shall be used as reference, but is not included in the approval of the rezone. So if we recommend to the Mayor and Commission approval with this condition, and then they rezone it with this condition as phrased, what exactly does that mean? Is it the same as saying there's no binding site plan, or is it semi-binding or softly binding? What is that by reference?
We split neighborhoods different ways on this. We've bound them in by unit count before and developable area before and gone non-binding completely before. So we just wanted to sort of reference the fact that we've seen those different decisions made by this board and by the mayor and commission, and wanted to respect that if anyone had changes to be made. But I would say essentially it means it's non-binding the way we wrote it.
The reason why I don't think that language was used either was it was important to reference this because it was also the subject of a variance. So this demonstration of needing the relief has been heard by another board, a quasi judicial group. So it has a little more weight to it than just a concept plan that is showing a potential yield. There have been decisions made based off of this arrangement of things. So it's a little different.
Yeah, I guess the practical import of the question is if this is a straight rezone without a binding site plan and Mr. Kittle were to, decide to sell the property to a different developer, Mr. Kittle may intend to build what's shown here, subject to minor technical roadway and stormwater and other changes like Mark referenced. But would another owner, or Mr. Kittle himself for that matter, if he changed his mind, not be then able to build 370 bedrooms of RM1 there on whatever site plan they want? If there's a straight rezone to RM1, 23.4 acres, and there's no binding site plan, then potentially something very different from what has been represented to the county and the neighbors could be built there. And so, I wonder if it wouldn't be better to just specify what aspects of it are binding, like the unit count or something, if that's important to the staff's recommendation of approval to the neighborhood's support that we've seen at this and a prior meeting, et cetera. If that's important, then perhaps we should figure out what aspect to bind.
I guess we could flesh out that wording a little bit if you want if you want to direct staff to do so. I don't know that we need to wordsmith it in the meeting tonight, but the approval by the hearings board for the access variance was looking at this alignment, at this number of units. So there's weight to that. Sitting here tonight, I can't tell you, I mean, the hearings board didn't pass action by saying this is binding, but they did provide relief based off of this concept. So that's where we were trying to strike a balance, that it's for reference, that it's got other regulatory weight behind it, but it is not binding in the traditional sense that they're going to do exactly that. We didn't want to oversell it. But I guess we could probably pull together some language that makes that a little clearer, maybe reference the variance.
So can I ask a question about the variance? Were there any conditions on the variance relating to the, okay. How much more buildable area is there kind of following up? Like if somebody did come in and do something different, are they kind of maxed out on the buildable area on this current plan, or could somebody build something much larger?
Probably a good question for the applicant.
Okay.
As a planning commissioner, you can direct that question to the applicant if you wish. Invite them.
Sure. Would the applicant like to answer that question?
More units can be achieved on the property. We've looked at half a dozen alternatives. But you would have to go to multi-story units to get the count. Probably have to wind up building a parking deck. So, I mean, there's a lot of extra cost associated with deviating from this plan to get the higher unit count. And Mr. Kittle is not a multi-story building developer. So he owns the property next door. It's predominantly a duplex development, has duplexes and townhomes. And one thing I did mention before, but in regard to the different price points, which we don't have just in this piece, I mean, they're all more expensive than what he currently owns. So the fact that he owns the property next door and has owned it for 40 years kind of is a good statement about his credibility in what he does and what he says he's going to do. Thank you.
Thanks. Kristen.
So non-binding site plan, right? Has the second entrance that is not required, but is there for fire access? Is that correct?
It's emergency access only.
Is that because the street is not technically wide enough to be a public street? Is that why that's not an actual official access?
It's the access out to a public road. So those are private streets. So there's only one access out to a public road. So Seagraves Drive, you see two here, but they go to the same point and then have one access out to Lexington.
Oh,
But
I
the
see.
front of Seagraves is
I see. The access point is actually Seagraves. There just happens to be.
correct.
Okay, sorry, I was confused about that, so. I am happy to make a motion for approval with the two conditions listed by staff. Second.
All right, we have a motion to approve with the conditions specified in the staff report. second by Sarah. Any further discussion of the motion?
I guess I'm still a little stuck on the site plan because I just want to be able to think it all the way through. What I'm sort of hearing is that an increase in density, but there's other things that would kick in that would maybe make that hard to do, like parking minimums and things like that. Is that right? Like that you if you can double the density of this site by building 1/1 duplexes or something like that, you would have a parking minimum increase that would then actually kind of reduce the number of buildings you can build or the amount of surface you can cover.
Plus a trip generation change that might change the evaluation by the Transportation and Public Works staff.
Yeah, and so that would just require, if in this scenario we're describing, that would require that to be reevaluated. Something about the plans review process would make that need to be reevaluated.
And yeah, if we had something about this design that tips the scales to where the evaluation that was completed, particularly as part of the variance review,
Yeah.
where that was no longer valid. And I don't know sitting here right now what that might be. We don't have representation from our engineering departments to comment, but that would be the reason why this representation is for reference. So rather than binding, because there are adjustments that could be made, and that, to Mark's point, making this binding might be overly restrictive and make it very difficult for the development. If you find it to be approvable, you may handcuff them with having this be binding because there's probably some engineering realities that are going to come to light during the construction plans review process.
All right, any further discussion before we vote? All right, Stephen, do you want to do a roll call?
Motion to approve with staff conditions. Morales,
Yes.
Collins,
Yes.
Beresford,
Yes.
Gehring,
Yes.
Laughlin,
Yes.
Sams,
Yes.
Sanders,
Yes.
Lord.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, that brings us to item 2 under old business on our agenda. That is 1580 and 1590 Lexington Road. And we'll begin with the staff.
Okay, got another one here back for another review with you all. We're at 1580 and 1590 Lexington Road. This is for special use SUP 2023 12 You click on that PowerPoint, please. Thank you, sir. So they're looking for a special use for a restaurant in the airport overlay. The airport overlay has a few uses that require an applicant, even if it's by right under regular circumstances, to come before this board and obtain a special use permit. The restaurant is one of those. This site has an existing convenience store on it. They're looking to add a quick service food restaurant attached to the convenience store. So it would be an expansion of the structure for a second use. They're asking for 2 variances. They're asking to reduce the required percentage of tree canopy from 40 to 35%. Staff supports this with a minor change, and I will go over that towards the end. They're also looking at a reduction in the required amount of landscaping from 20% to 13%, and staff supports that request as well. I will go over that at the end as well. So we are just outside of the loop on Lexington Road here. We have the movie theater. We have the existing Marathon gas station. We have a car wash and a boxing gym here next to it. So this structure that you can see right here would be expanding a little bit to the east, and then they would be using the bulk of the property for parking and flow. You can see here that the zoning is commercial general. They're looking to maintain the commercial general zoning with the special use on top. I apologize. Yes, sorry. Okay, and then future land use, we have general business, and we are staying general business on that as well. Most of the other surrounding property there along Lexington was general business and commercial. There's a little bit of multifamily to the southeast of this property. So here on the site plan, you can see the expansion of the structure. The gas canopy would be maintained there. We have some of this in some existing parking, but this would be a little bit more formalized. Some of it's sort of dated and in need of new painting, I would say. They're also looking at an existing site that has, this existing flow and this existing pavement across it. So in order to meet stormwater, they're looking to install permeable pavers for a portion of this. They're looking to install the extra spaces we require for drive-through uses for folks to sit and wait if the food takes an extra minute. And then they're doing a little bit of upgraded landscaping and tree management here. Additionally, moving the dumpster over here to a standardized location. It would have the drive-through around the rear of the structure. Here is an image of the structure as changing. So you see the existing convenience store, currently a Marathon gas station owned by the Jones Petroleum Corporation. And then you have here the quick service restaurants. And I believe that we have, let me go back here. There was a TMP, but I apologize for that not being in here. So in terms of the variance, we have the existing landscape structure around it. They are changing that a little bit and then shifting a little bit from the rear over towards the side here, a little bit of an upgrade. There is hedge screen being planted in here and then the trees as well. So staff looked around and tried to see if we could get these variances removed. However, due to a lot of utilities, we have a transmission line down here. So this is why we do not have large street trees on this property. These are all small. They're inside that transmission line easement. We have local electricity through there. Then we have electricity coming through the property, as well as some stormwater. And so the only upgrade that staff could find is to change this tree from an existing crepe myrtle, which is very small by our tree ordinance calculation, to be upgraded to a medium canopy. So staff is willing to accept the applicant's request for the variance with that one minor change to change this crepe myrtle to a medium canopy tree. So with that, staff is recommending approval of the project. We find this to be compatible with the 2023 comprehensive plan. We have a corridor commercial along this property, and to upgrade that commercial establishment and install a little bit more intensity at that property, staff deems to be in line with the comprehensive plan. Also in line with the future land use map, and the zoning map has been approved by the airport authority, and that this project does meet the conditions in the SUP. So here, in terms of the variance, just wanted to mention that, in terms of the extraordinary nature of this property, we have an existing property that's been graded and paved, existing structures, existing traffic flow on site. So a small expansion to that, where a former restaurant used to be, for a new restaurant, staff finds to be in compliance with that section. The fact that this particular piece of property would not create any undue or unnecessary hardship. We've got the existing commercial center there, and with the traffic flow, staff finds that this project would likely add some companion traffic flow going through the restaurant, but likely to be the traffic flow that's going by this area of town. In terms of special conditions or circumstances not being resolved of the applicant, we find that this existing facility being in place and with all of the infrastructure that's out there, staff has deemed that to be in compliance. About this benefiting the property and not having negative impacts with the existing commercial landscape, or commercial property there, with the signalized access coming off of the eastern portion of the property, access onto Barnett Shoals, and then the right in, right out on Lexington. Staff finds that to be in compliance. And then lastly is about the tree canopy and landscaping. That small amendment to get a little bit more tree canopy. It doesn't get them all the way up to the 40% required, but it is an improvement, and they are improving the landscaping and the canopy in the overall sense. So with that, I will conclude the staff report and leave this up for your benefit.
Thank you, Mark. At this time, we'll hear from the applicant.
Good evening. I'm Jeremy Crosby with JPC Design and Construction LLC, 264 Alabama Boulevard, Jackson, Georgia. We're coming for you just requesting the special use approval and the variance approvals that staff has laid out. We're been happy to work with them and helped us work through all the issues to get to this point. We've got an old store that's tired and it's ready for a makeover and an addition. And with today's cost and to do a project, we need to put a second income stream business, and a restaurant was already there, and put a restaurant back on this spot. So we'd like to add that on to the end of the building. And we're going to totally gut the existing convenience store and gas station all the way down to the steel and redo it, and it'll essentially be a brand new store inside and out when we get done. And then add on the restaurant addition with the drive-through also. The gas canopy out front will stay, but it's going to be totally rebranded and re-imaged with all new materials on it also. So it will actually look, the structure will be the same, but the imaging and the finishes on it will also be brand new on this site. So that staff did a good job presenting it, and I just asked for your approval to move forward. And we look forward to redoing the store and dressing this property up because it's ready for it. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy.
Thank you, Mr. Crosby. Is there any member of the public here to speak in support of this application? And is there any member of the public here to speak in opposition to the application? All right, seeing none, we will bring our discussion back behind the rail. Who wants to start us off?
So explain the motion.
I certainly would.
Okay, I would like to make a motion that we approve the application.
Right. Motion to approve by Sarah Beresford, second by Kristen. Any discussion of the motion?
Under staff conditions, I might be confused about the change to the tree canopy. Did that already happen or does that need to be conditioned?
We were hoping to just deal with that through the plans review process. I'd spoken to the applicant and they had mentioned that they were fine with that change.
Okay, so do we need to put that in?
We didn't feel we needed to. We can handle that at the plans review. The variance that's in there that you all are approving is approving it at this level that's being displayed right now. It would go up a fraction of a percentage.
Stephen, do you want to do a roll call?
Motion to approve. Morales,
Yes.
Collins,
Yes.
Beresford, Gary,
Yes.
Laughlin,
Yes.
Zams,
Yes.
Sanders,
Yes.
Lord. Yes. Motion passes.
That brings us to the new business section of our agenda, and item 1 is 1125 Prince Avenue. And we'll begin with the staff report.
All right, 1125 Prince Avenue. I just realized as I was walking up here, I forgot to tuck in my shirt, so I apologize for my uncouth attire today. Well, there goes a demerit. All right, so this is PD 2024-06-1300. Yep. Technology is great until it decides not to work. All right, so the request is to take a commercial neighborhood property and turn it into a commercial neighborhood planned development property. This would be to rebuild and expand the current Popeyes drive-through that is there. That expansion would be a larger kitchen. It is a relatively small expansion, but it is for a larger kitchen. The applicant mentioned this was in order to allow for more efficiency within the footprint and within the parcel. Part of this would also be to create a new drive-through and a new parking layout. Part of that parking layout is to redo the rear of it, but also have a connection to the crystals on the parcel adjacent, which is owned by the same applicant. Make sure. Would also be to add green space to the rear, but also losing some of that green space that's currently up front. And in order to do the stormwater for this, they would be putting the underground stormwater management system. So as you can see, we are right along Prince. So we have our Piedmont Hospital over here to the west. We have the Crystals, which would be that connection over here to the east. We have our residential to the south, and then along the corridor here, both we have the McDonald's, and then a little bit farther down the Co-op, Flying Biscuit, Barbaritos, and other commercial within there as well. But essentially one of the main strips of Prince Avenue before we get to the more core normal town area. So this is the future land use. There is no request to change it. It is currently a Main Street business, which is something in the report that we wanted to mention in terms of what its definition is. Hey, Mark. Never mind, figured it out. So it would just be going from CN to CNPD for its zoning. This is the current Popeyes that is out there. As you can see, it's a traditional, sort of that Americana 80s style of a drive-through. This location has been a drive-through for a very long time. 2004 is when Popeyes came in and made it this, but it was a drive-through prior to that. So this is the site plan. As you can see, we have a little bit of loss of the front grass and the green space in order to create a new pathway through. We have new striping on the, I guess, north for this, but this would be westward. New parking in the back and then the connection through it. This is a rendering of what would currently, or what would be built if this was approved. Staff did note that the renderings that were given and the architecture that was given were not the same. And so that was, along with a few other things that we pointed out for compliance issues, one of the things that we just wanted to point to. So in terms of staff recommendation, we believe that this is largely incompatible with the 2023 comprehensive plan. It is an infill lot, so we're not trying to eliminate any green space. And they do add some green space off that back, like I said. However, it does not improve that safety and accessibility for people walking, biking, and busing, something that this corridor has been focused on for a long time, as you can see farther down on Prince with some of those traffic calming measures that are already in place. It also does not decrease automobile trips, as it's another call for this Main Street business type category and the stretch of Prince. And then also does not create an appealing or inviting community gateway or corridor. Something else that's pointed out in both the comprehensive plan for 2023 comprehensive plan. So staff sees that this proposal is currently not compatible with the future land use, as Main Street business directly states that drive-throughs and more automobile oriented businesses would not be suitable for Main Street business. It's not compatible with that zoning map. Because it is asking for relief on something that is directly prohibited. And that prohibition is mostly because this is a level 1 corridor. So what that is essentially establishing that certain corridors within Athens have different restrictions on them because the community goals through the comprehensive plan and through the code have deemed it so that these areas need certain or different attention. I think we all know that Prince is one of the more popular corridors and one of the corridors that everyone likes to point to for why Athens can be so great. And this section of code with the level 1 corridor basically reflects that. And then for zoning ordinances, the report points out multiple things that would need to be changed in order for this to become code compliant if this was to be made binding. So I think that is, that's it for the staff report.
Thank you, Max. At this time, we'll hear from the applicant.
Good evening. My name's Luke. We met with Axis Infrastructures. We're the civil engineers on the project. 70, address is 70 Mansell Court, Roswell, Georgia. As mentioned, there are some staff recommendations for code compliance. Since we received the comments, we have addressed almost all of the comments. Just want to touch on those real quick. First one is the minimum parking count. We've adjusted the seat count for the building and the layout to actually address that comment. So we are currently meeting the parking count. Number two is the drive-through use is not allowed per the zoning code. The reason for the planned use is to allow the drive-through. As mentioned, it's been there for forever. And we're just asking to keep the existing drive-through. With the drive-through, we will be making improvements. As mentioned, the kitchen is getting larger to improve efficiency of the restaurant, as well as adjusting the spacing of the drive-through equipment in relation to the window. So you can have appropriate full car length stack to the window. 3, drive-through criteria does not meet the code. I believe one of the items that we aren't meeting, there's a few others that require some additional design, including grading of the drive-through lanes, which we have to work through, and I believe we can meet all of those. The one we currently aren't meeting is the parking spaces on the forward side, or in this case, the north side of the building. So as cars come through the drive-through, there's nowhere for them to pull forward on the site for, in case their kitchen's backed up or whatever might have you. The newest site plan, which isn't reflected here, we've created a new plan this week, has 2 additional stalls in front of the building to address that concern. Number 5, lot coverage is 75% for the CN zone. I'm sorry, 80%. We're currently showing 75. We've actually removed a few driveway area and parking stalls to actually meet that 80% now. Number 6 and number 7 kind of go hand in hand. It's the rear setback and the rear buffer to residential. There's 3 different criteria for that buffer. We've chosen the third one, which is a 10-foot landscape buffer along with the 6-foot high opaque wall. So we've added that. And also number 6 is 10-foot rear setback. So we're also meeting that with the newest plan. Number 8 is the FAR requirement. It's required to be 0.25. We actually are not meeting that requirement. We are 0.11. The size of our building is smaller than what the requirement minimum asks us to be. So we'll be requesting a waiver for that one. Number 9 is the fenestration calculations. As mentioned, we're still working through the building elevations, but I do not foresee an issue meeting that requirement. And number 10 is street trees. Per code, it's 1 per 30 feet of frontage. We have 100 feet. So we've added the required amount of street trees in the newest plan. And then number 11 is bike parking is not shown. So we've actually added a bike rack in front of the building as well to make it more pedestrian friendly. In addition, I believe we are making the building more pedestrian friendly by adding a sidewalk connection to the actual building. With the newest plan, there is a little more green space in front of the building as opposed to having that driveway that pulls through. There's just 2 parking spaces with a little bit of additional green space. With the new plan, the building and the site will be fully ADA compliant. So pedestrians can access the building in a wheelchair, on foot. And then as mentioned in the staff report, this site in the building does not decrease the trips. But with the more efficient kitchen and the appropriate stacking from the drive-through equipment to the window, the site will be more efficient and it will get cars onto the site and off of Prince Avenue quicker. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We may call you back up to, for answers. Oh, I'm sorry,
I do have a question.
okay, I stand corrected. We have questions.
I was trying to catch you before you started. So thank you, for answering the ADA standard, because I was concerned about that. That's great. What do you mean by Newton's curb appeal to the existing location?
So more so just for the building, they'll have the more modern, Popeyes prototype, as well as, more landscaping and trees. We're adding those street trees. So from Prince Ave, as you're riding by, I believe there might be one tree northwest. We'll actually be adding, it'll be either 3 or 4 new trees, and plantings in the front of the building, as you can kind of see a little bit from the rendering. This isn't an exact replica, but, it'll just be more visually appealing.
Okay, and you said, because of the size increase, an underground storm system be added? What's there now?
There's actually nothing there to my knowledge. All of the water currently surface drains from the back of the site directly into Prince Ave. So the building, the site, everything kind of surface drains to the road. So with the new plan, we'd actually be, as mentioned, engineering an underground system, which would reduce the overall stormwater, provide water quality per the county's.
Thank you.
Is there any member of the public here wishing to speak in support of this proposal? Is there any member of the public here wishing to speak in opposition to this proposal?
My name's Margie Spalding and I live at 739 Cobb. And I also have 749 Cobb, which are right across the street from the homes that back up to this. And it has actually not been there forever. It's been there for 20 years. But I have a couple of questions. One of them, my understanding that it's grandfathered in because the comprehensive plan was created after the building was there. Is that correct? So changing the zoning, would that just cement it and give it its own zoning without it being grandfathered? And then my other question was, why are we connecting it with Crystal? I didn't hear that addressed. So those are my questions. And I sort of speaking against giving it its own zoning when it doesn't comply with the general.
Thank you, Ms. Spalding. Is there any other member of the public here wishing to speak in opposition?
Yes, my name is Amy Andrews and I live at 282 King Avenue. I do not believe that this plan is, well, I do not believe that your ordinance, your zoning ordinance and your comp plan and your future land use map do not allow drive-throughs on Prince Avenue. We have 4 already and that's 4 too many. There are 3 in this location, 2 right next to each other and 1 across the street. The comp plan is seeking to encourage pedestrian uses and create a lively streetscape. This does not. This plan is meant to increase auto traffic around the building to service more drive-through customers. The landscape plans that they've addressed is inadequate. The Crystal and the Popeyes are the most desolate areas of Prince Avenue in terms of landscaping. Crystal's is basically asphalt and concrete. There's a minuscule row of shrubs in the front. Popeyes is not much better. The landscape plan that is being proposed is supposed to add 12 Shumard oaks. I only see 6 on the landscape plan, and the landscape plan does not match the site plan here. They're different. They're removing the front landscaping to add that sidewalk off of Prince Avenue. But this is really not a pedestrian use restaurant. And between Nakuchi, which is right there on McDonald's, and King Avenue, which is about 400 feet, there are 4 curb cuts on the south side of Prince Avenue and 3 on the north side. And you've got the King Avenue turn lane, and you often have people trying to turn into one of the restaurants, get into the turn lane of King Avenue, people coming out. And they straddle the sidewalk often as they're trying to find ways to get onto Prince Avenue. So it's really hard for pedestrians to do that, to navigate that. So I think the curb cuts are already excessive in that area, and a lot of the reason for that is because of these fast food restaurants. If I left anything off here. McDonald's, when it was wanting to rebuild several years ago, the District 5 commissioner at the time worked with them to do semi-purpose paving, added a lot of landscaping, trees in the front, adding a monument sign, adding a bike rack, adding an outdoor cafe area. And I don't necessarily think that's appropriate for Popeyes or the Crystal. I think that's just one too many, but this is not even coming close to that. So thank you.
Ms. Andrews. Is there any other member of the public here wishing to speak in opposition? All right, seeing none, bring it back behind the ring. Who would like to start us off? Kristen.
So to recap, I did appreciate the staff report about this, but is it that because we're basically tearing down the building and building a new one? And so that triggers the idea that, hey, is this even possible in this spot? Correct. Yeah, so, okay, I wanted to just make sure we had a baseline. Yeah, I'll just say, as someone who lives less than a half mile from here, and I walk along here several times a month, and this is probably the worst spot to walk along Prince Avenue. I thought it was interesting, the comments about the McDonald's, because, you know, in this portion of Prince Avenue, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of things turning. As someone who walks on either side of the street, it actually is more pleasant to walk along the McDonald's side. And I never really thought about it much, but it is interesting how there are some subtle tweaks that you can make to a restaurant that isn't really supposed to be there to begin with, and it does make it more pleasant. Question for staff, because then we also have the Barbaritos and the Flying Biscuit, but because those are not drive-throughs, that's why it's a completely different answer. Correct. Okay. Yeah, I guess, you know, so we're here for comments. You know, I feel really weird about granting a PD to a restaurant that really, I mean, I'm not trying to be mean in any way, shape, or form. I don't eat chicken, so I probably shouldn't even be commenting on it, but like, you know, it makes me feel weird that we would be allowing something that really is not helping in this section. So I guess that would be my question to the applicant, is like, what can you give me to like help offset what's gonna happen? Like, great, you're gonna redesign the building, you're gonna make your kitchen more efficient, but like for anybody who lives in this area, who walks along this area of Prince Avenue, right there, I ride my bike with my kids along here. I want it to be more pleasant than the sort of strip of asphalt and hot that it is. So that would be my challenge to y'all, is add some more trees, add some more pleasant areas to be along here. If we're gonna be asking to allow this in a space where it probably shouldn't be.
Sarah.
Yeah, with all of the planning and process that has gone into designating the uses along this corridor, and I don't imagine that anything in our upcoming planning process is gonna change anything about this that would make, in a way that would make drive-throughs something that we're trying to put back on Prince Avenue. I don't see any tweaks that would end up making this acceptable. And I personally have nothing against drive-throughs on Prince Avenue. But I do I do approve of and support the comprehensive planning process that went into all of the things that staff are saying here about why this should not be granted. If we are gonna move away from auto-centric uses, it's gonna happen slowly over time as grandfathered uses are filtered out and phased out, and I don't think that we should do anything to extend the life of that business cycle.
Alex?
So what I understand also is if they can renovate this, they can add on to this building. They just can't demo more than 51% and keep their drive, correct? So their option would be to renovate. In other words, they have that option. Correct? Correct. Okay, so they could do that and not have to comply to anything new whatsoever. No more trees, no more,
That's not entirely true.
Okay.
If there was an expansion of 10% or more, I'm sorry, on this corridor, there are site design standards they would have to follow, but that wouldn't impact the drive-through use. So street trees, sidewalk, landscaping, that kind of thing, parking lot trees may be required if they were to expand by 10% or greater. We would seek compliance with that, and we would do that administratively through the plans review process.
Would that include stormwater improvements?
It can. That trigger comes from Transportation and Public Works. Typically, it's a 5,000 square foot threshold of disturbance that would cause that to happen. But if there have been rare instances where we've had kind of hotspots for stormwater issues where they may work with the property to get a retrofit.
Does 5,000 square feet of disturbance apply if they're, repaving a parking lot? Or is it just,
If they take it down to the soil, it would.
okay,
Yeah.
it's not 5,000 square feet of new additional impervious surface, it's just.
Or that, if it was new where there wasn't previous,
I'm saying, I don't think that they're gonna,
retopping is not an issue.
retopping wouldn't do it, but if they take it, if they repave more thoroughly, that would trigger
We
it.
do have instances where the demolition, because it will take away slab, it'll take it down to soil. That could be something where they consider stormwater improvements to be required.
I guess, Sarah, go ahead. And then
What I was thinking about this project is, so the drive-through use is gonna be happening at the site, whether this gets approved or not, I think, unless I were just to decide to abandon it. But so as we're talking and I'm listening and thinking about, the one thing that I do kind of want to get an answer to the question that Ms. Spalding brought up, in that would it cement the grandfathered use? Would a PD, this is a grandfathered use, right? So if you get a PD rezone, you've basically made that permanent. It runs with the land.
Correct.
Okay, so
It
I
would-
think it's a good point. I think that's a really good point. I'm glad she made that. But I think, an opportunity that a PD presents would be sort of given the idea that we think that probably that a drive-through restaurant's gonna exist there for a while, a PD presents an opportunity to get that sidewalk, get more street trees, try to use the PD. In other words, Kristen, you kind of touched on it, that often when we talk about PDs, we talk about what community benefit can you provide? If you're going to get this rezone, what community benefit can you provide sort of to make it worth the community's while to make that exception? And for me, that would be a much better thought out, that space, the entire space between the front of the restaurant and the right of way, that's the opportunity to sort of change that. Not really sure why. So I do like the idea of connecting into the Crystal parking lot. I think that makes sense in terms of reducing the mess that can happen out on Prince if you want to go from one parcel to the next, but I'm not sure if that driveway in front of the restaurant, which isn't there now, but would be created by this, I'm not sure if that's necessary. So that would be, my comment would be, if this comes back to us, like reimagine that whole entire space and think about that a way if I were a person living over there and walking all the time, the only way that would be acceptable to me would be a more pleasant pedestrian experience. So that has to be part of that PD. That being said, I do kind of worry about doing things that cement in a grandfathered use. So sort of place there, but those are my comments, I think.
Yeah, I'll go next. I agree with pretty much everything that Sarah Beresford just said. And I think Alex makes a really good point that as a legal matter, I'm not sure if the neighbors all are aware of this, but this use is not permitted by the comprehensive plan, but on this parcel, it's a grandfathered in use, which means they can keep a drive-through there as long as they want. If they don't significantly change it. They could renovate and improve the existing building. Once they tear down more than half of the existing building, then they lose their grandfathered status. So a full demo and rebuild, which is what they're proposing, would lose their grandfathered status, and that's why they're here. But if they just renovated, they could probably achieve very much the same thing or something close to it. I would imagine, I don't know, I'm not a fast food building architect. I don't know what they could do with renovations, but it wouldn't surprise me if they were able to continue operating to both modernize and make the building look like they want it to look and not have to go through this discretionary process. So it may be that that's what ends up happening. With all that said, I agree with what Sarah said about, I appreciate that the applicant has added pedestrian connections. I understood the applicant to say that little driveway in front of the building that's shown on the site plan has been deleted this week, replaced with a couple of drive-through parking spots where you wait for your food if it's not ready, and also with a sidewalk, and also with, did you say bike racks?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, so, staff's larger point is part of the reason this is incompatible with the comprehensive plan is that it does not improve pedestrian and bicyclist access to the neighborhood and to the site. And it sounds like the applicant's trying to do some things in that general direction with pedestrian connection and bike racks from the policy level for the city, it does seem counterproductive to, if you have a bad, not very functional existing drive-through, to freeze that and say, you're not allowed to change it. It does seem like they can change it. And so if we can get some pro-social, pro-pedestrian, pro-bicyclist changes to the site plan, that may be the best that Athens-Clarke County can hope for here, given that they have a legal right to continue operating a drive-through there. So with all that said, I think I appreciate the applicant's gestures in that direction. I think, like Sarah, perhaps they could do more, I don't know if anybody's gonna sit at a picnic table out front and eat their food, but maybe they would, right? They have picnic tables out at Steak and Shake on Broad Street. It may be that sort of thing that makes it not feel like it's 100% car focused would be an issue. So I would just encourage the applicant to, where they bring it back, to work hard on bike and pedestrian improvements that take account of the many people that live in the neighborhood that might want to patronize this business and just walk along Prince Avenue without, solely focusing on the automotive customers. Sarah Gang.
Just as far as like this being a bike and pedestrian friendly business, I just wanted to, it looks like the sidewalk that they said that leads to the restaurant is like cars can drive through it. So I would just like to point out that that's like not a sidewalk. It looks like, maybe it's a little bit raised, maybe it's like a speed bump. But that's not it's not really a significant pedestrian thing, and like the core issue with the drive-through as far as pedestrian corridors goes is that the cars go in and out of it. Like, it's not about aesthetics necessarily, although that is part of it. The use itself is incompatible with bike and pedestrian, especially if we want to see a bike lane on Prince Avenue in our lifetimes. Cars going through, back and through it. It is simply not compatible. And I feel like some folks are talking as if the Popeyes will just continue to exist in perpetuity. Even if this is denied, but I don't think that if it's important enough that they are going through the PD process. And also I would like to pull this out from the staff report. When they said that this proposal is attempting to incorrectly use a process that is designed to encourage development of compatible land uses on a scale larger than that of individual small parcels. Staff believes the plan development process should not be used to seek relief from code compliance and goals of the comprehensive plan without providing sufficient cause. Pull that out.
I have a question for staff just about kind of piggybacking on the last comments about, like the number of curb cuts kind of coming in and out, like in relation to like bike lanes and safety and stuff. Is there anything in the ordinances that mandates the number of curb cuts for a property like this? Like if they are, I remember hearing that they are the same property owners, and could they combine the flow of traffic between the Crystal and the Popeyes to limit the number of curb cuts? Or are they required to have one in, one out for each property?
So you can have shared access that can provide relief for having a full service commercial drive, meaning in and out. They've divided that into directional flow, 2 curb cuts. There are technical standards from the Transportation and Public Works staff on how to adequately serve a commercial use. This is a GDOT route, so we have a little bit of extra coordination on that point. Sometimes we have a little extra engineering to satisfy a state standard. But if you had a use that had developed shared access opportunities with the adjacent properties, you could provide relief from the number of access points on the right of way, if that's answering your question.
Yeah. So there is room to decrease the number of curb cuts, I guess, is what I'm ultimately asking. Possibly.
Challenges with the flow of the drive-through, quite honestly. But yeah, sitting here today, talking this through, could it become 1 curb cut instead of 2? Maybe.
What about width of curb cuts? Is there a maximum width that they're allowed? Because, some of the ones on Prince do seem, think of like Wendy's, Captain D's areas, that those seem really hazardous because you have left turners coming across traffic and gunning it to avoid oncoming traffic, T-boning them, and then maybe they don't notice till the last minute that you have pedestrians or bicyclists on that. So a 30-foot wide driveway is a whole lot less safe for pedestrians and cyclists than a 20-foot or 15.
Right. It is a little bit context sensitive, but there are maximums. We tend to hear more about the minimums, honestly, because if this were built today, a lot of times they're wanting to minimize the cost of the paving and the apron and everything else. So to tell you what that maximum might be for this kind of use on this corridor with the posted speeds and the traffic counts, I couldn't do that.
Is that something that Transportation Public Works staff would be able to work up if this proposal comes back in a future month and perhaps include that information in the report?
It could.
Okay. That might be.
It seems to me that even if this were to be a renovation, that this site could not be made pedestrian and bicycle friendly enough to make it really pedestrian and bicycle friendly in practice. There is a lot going on at that intersection, certainly including the hospital, which is significant. There are pedestrians along there who are visitors to the hospital who aren't so familiar with the territory as you are, you know, trying to walk that area as well. So, you know, it's a level 1 corridor. And as proposed, what's envisioned for this site is not allowed. And if something else were to happen to try and beautify it, make it friendly to pedestrians and bicyclists, I don't think it would work enough viable.
I think I just wanted to add to, like, I appreciate the discussion about neighboring property and the possibility of having fewer curb cuts and, but I think the bottom line though, I mean, this is a drive-through restaurant. They're planning on renovating this drive-through, not this and the Crystal. And to maximize your, I mean, the business model is cars in, cars out. So I think all of that would have to be voluntary. We'd have to see it come from the applicant to make a concerted effort to reduce that footprint. And I feel like it would just actively go against their business model, which then brings up the idea of we have this use in this corridor that's really not allowed to begin with. So that's a problem. But yeah, that was my only thought when we were talking about the curb cuts and everything. I love the idea. I don't think we would ever see it happen, but I love the idea. So.
Alex, do we have stats on, for staff? With a drive-through versus without a drive-through, the amount of traffic that would come in, and it might have been in here, I'm looking for it, but.
I believe it's in the staff report. That's an excellent question. We could get that information and certainly work with the applicant to also pull their numbers from there.
That would help me understand, because often numbers don't lie. And so I get that more people would come through. I don't want to get out. I just want to drive through. And that's why they have drive through. But it would be nice to kind of have a little more clue what we're looking at.
Any further comments, Richard? Okay. Thank you. And that brings us to our next item on the agenda, which is Arnett Shoals Road.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Jakey, staff here. I'm presenting the staff report for this Lakewood Plan Development Project, PD 2024-07-1314. The applicant is requesting a rezone from commercial neighborhood plan development RM1 and RS8 to commercial neighborhood plan development. This requires a change to the future land use, a slight one, as I'll show on the map, from traditional neighborhood and mixed density residential to just traditional neighborhood. And the purpose is to amend the Lakewood plan development, which has been in effect for 20 years. Specifically, we're building out, the proposal is to build out a 90-acre section of the unfinished PD with a new neighborhood. And I use neighborhood specifically because we're talking about a huge diversity of housing types, over a dozen, as well as compatible commercial uses, green space. We're talking everything from single-family detached homes to townhomes to live-work units, mixed-use commercial residential, and then a variety of multifamily types, buildings ranging from 2 to 30 units. We're not talking about 7 or 8 stories. We're talking about 2 to 3 typically. The applicant says 795 units total. They didn't specify if that's bedrooms or if that's units, so we're asking them to clarify that. And we're also asking for a number on the commercial square footage that they're proposing, but it is shown on your site plan. Adding multiple connections to the street network. So this is not going to be an island of development. It's going to tie into existing and potentially future street networks. Two connections onto Barnett Shoals, one onto Deacle Drive, one through a parcel to get to Park Ridge Court. That would be involved demolishing a duplex and building a street connection there. And then one connection to Shady Brook, which you saw earlier. Both of those properties intend to marry up with a street connection. Project is built and designed or proposed to be designed on new urbanist principles. That's a school of design trying to recapture lessons from traditional development patterns that we used to build cities across the US and the globe, mostly prior to World War II here in America. These principles are putting people first in the design typically, rather than designing around the automobile. So things like alley loaded garages, accessing those garages from the rear of the property instead of the front, a variety of housing types, mixing compatible commercial and residential uses instead of separating everything out, public greens and green spaces, plentiful street trees, and pushing up the buildings closer to the street rather than setting them far back. Project like this does typically require quite a few waivers, so they have requested 12 of them. They're all outlined in your staff report. Staff supports 8 of them. We've deemed that 2 are unnecessary, and then we need some more information on 2 of them before we would make a recommendation on those. And the big one is to substitute the design book that is provided for you in your packet, substituting that for the design standards that we have on the books in chapter 9-25. And I'll get into that a little bit later. This is not just a random parcel of land. It is tied to Lakewood Planned Development, which was started in 2004, 20 years ago. The original proposal on 207 acres included 173,000 square feet of commercial, 94 condos, 360 apartments, 330 single-family detached lots, and 88 townhomes. It's been amended slightly in 2005, 2006, 2014, 2017, and 2020. As of this summer, we have built 0 amounts of commercial, 0 condos, about 200 apartments, and 43 single-family houses, as well as 38 townhomes. What's proposed on 90 acres here is commercial, and we've asked for a specific number on that square footage. No condos here, but also a number of apartments, again, asking for some specification on that from the applicant. 150 single-family lots and 42 townhouses. So think about this not just in terms of what's there on the land, but what's there as approved in the current PD. So we have, unlike some other PDs that migrate over time, this project builds on the new urbanist design and the spirit of the original 2004 PD, and maybe even elevates it in some ways. So right now, it's not just the base zoning, they're currently allowed to do 173,000 square feet and the apartments and all of those kinds of things. So comparing it not just from 0 development out there, but also to what's currently approved would be advised. This is an aerial of the site. Direct your attention to the black line. That shows the entire PD. It comes around, it's about 207 acres. And then the subject properties are all these properties that are highlighted in the black and red checked. As you can see, we have the 43 single-family homes are up here on Deacle Drive and Edgewater. Then we have the multifamily and the townhomes down here. Barnett Shoals runs along the left, and then at the very, very top, you can see Lexington Road. This is Shady Brook, which you saw earlier. We can see there's generally a lot of development around the whole area, residential, commercial. So this is an infill site, undeveloped itself on this subject area, all wooded for the most part. You can see a little bit of topography. There's some hills, there's some creeks, and you can see in your site plan that the applicant has designed around that specifically. This is our future land use map. Really doesn't require anything more than a slight change at the top. There's a parcel here that's designated as mixed density residential. It would need to be redesignated to traditional neighborhood to match the rest of the plan development or the rest of the area. It's only designated for stormwater in this plan, so it's really a minor piece of the project. And then I've the darker shaded area is intended to show you where the entire Lakewood PD sits right now. Similar thing with the zoning. We have CN, commercial neighborhood PD on all of the site. We are expanding to cover that Park Ridge parcel right there, which would serve as a street connection. But otherwise, no change to the zoning map. This is Deacle Drive. This is the original street. It was built when the first phase of this plan development got started. You can see it's got mature street trees on both sides. It's got sidewalks on both sides of the street. These trees function to provide shade to make it tolerable to walk there, more comfortable. It calms traffic, provides an element of safety for folks moving through that area. This is a characteristic of new urbanist design principles. And this is the kind of street that you could expect in the proposal. As you get further into the development, you get to the houses, and again, you have these mature canopy trees framing the street. You've got the houses that are close to the street. They're not separated by a big yard. They've got porches and stoops and areas that encourage social connection among neighbors. So, and again, those principles are being carried over into the next part of the design. And then this is Edgewater Drive, again, part of that same area. You can see the street trees, the houses, all set up to encourage multiple transportation options and social connection amongst neighbors. It's our site plan. We've got Barnett Shoals along the left, and most, if not all, of the commercial is going to be in this phase 1 area here. There's also going to be plenty of residential in that area, and then it works its way alongside Deacle Lake through here, 3 phases here. Here's the street connection to Park Ridge. In staff's mind, it differs a little bit from that street connection that you saw at near Green Acres, in that it's not creating an isolated home on one side that's divorced from the rest of the neighborhood. So in this case, it may actually serve to benefit that neighborhood and give it connection to this project and to the commercial and to the green spaces here, rather than being a detriment. And then at the top here is the street connection to the Shady Brook property that was discussed earlier. The applicant's given you some much more colorful renderings. Here's the phase 1 called the Arts and Entertainment District. I want to draw your attention to this dashed area showing the greenway. We have an ACC greenway that comes up through this area. This is Carriage Lane. There's a gas station right here, and there's a mid-block crossing here for pedestrians, folks bicycling. And the applicant is proposing to bring this greenway through the development all the way through along the lake and then on to connect over to the Shady Brook area as proposed by the ACC Greenway Network Plan. It's going to provide eventually connection. In theory, you could connect from here on bike or on foot all the way to campus and eventually even to downtown. So there's an important piece of transportation infrastructure here that would complement the design. And then this is the rest of the project, phases 2, 3, and 4. Probably looking at multiple years, perhaps many years before you would get all of this done. But again, here's the connection to Park Ridge and then the connection to Shady Brook. And you've got a diverse set of housing types in all of these sections. Each of them is going to have a little bit of a theme as well. If you've seen the style types, there'll be 1 or 2 that are considered primary, and then the rest kind of fill in behind them. Speaking of the design, we're just going to give you a quick sampling. There's a lot more in your book, but this is, for example, a mixed use building. It's going to have ground floor commercial and then residential above that. You see a type description in your book describing what this building is like and what its characteristics are. And we'll talk about a typical unit range. So in addition to ground floor, you're going to have approximately 8 to 20 residential dwelling units here. And then once you pick this building, you're also going to match it up with a style type. And this style is going to have, for example, in gray, these are mandatory design elements. And then you're also going to have a series of optional design elements that you have to pick from to use. So everything from brickwork to siding to the way the windows are arranged, all those kinds of things, all those kinds of details are covered in these, in the design standards. Balconies. This is another example. This is a mansion apartment designed for 6 to 10 dwelling units. Building is going to look like a large mansion. In this case, they've given us a Tudor style, which includes these types of design elements. We have a tree house, what they're calling a tree house. It's a single family home essentially, but it's going to have the garage on the first floor, and then the main floor is going to be on that second floor there. Again, a set of design standards that you would pick to work with. And then you have these styles. There's 5 of them. I've shown 2 for illustration. Again, adding another layer of design elements, and you're going to mix your styles and your building types to create your final product. Overall, staff feedback here is that the project is highly compatible with the 2023 comprehensive plan. We don't say that very often. It does over a dozen housing types. It goes above and beyond in supplying diversity. It also provides the opportunity to have housing at multiple price points. The green spaces have been designed as social centerpieces, more park-like, rather than being kind of leftover areas that they couldn't develop anyways. They are set to be places where folks are going to gather and meet their neighbors and create friends and social connections. It's walkable. It's got that greenway through there as well. It's got connectivity through multiple sections of the road network, and then it's going to help create an east side node at the commercial area. It's compatible with the future land use map and the zoning map. From staff's standpoint, the design book needs to be a bit more refined to be an effective regulatory tool. Remember, they're asking to substitute the design book as the binding plan instead of using our design standards. And so it's still a little bit vague. And in order for it to be effective, especially if we've got a potential for a long development period with multiple staff and multiple developers and multiple designers over perhaps multiple decades, we need this to be a little bit more clear so that everybody knows what's expected and we can hold people to the spirit of this project if it were to be approved. They've also submitted the site plan as non-binding, which is contrary to how we do plan developments, which typically come with binding plans, binding architecture. So we need to work with the applicant to figure out how much of this is going to be binding and how they can refine the plan to get to a binding state. There's also other departments, transportation, public works, public utilities, the fire marshal, they have feedback and they need to see some refinements to meet their technical standards. Nothing that we've seen that's deal breaking, but definitely some things that need refinement. I'll close by saying that staff is excited about this project. This is a potential example for future development in Athens if it's done well. Tonight, it's only here for comments. It will come back later at the master review stage for a recommendation from this body. And so we encourage you to load up the comments tonight so that the applicant can do the most to refine their plan and give you a really refined and ready to submit plan on up to the mayor and commission at the master stage. That concludes staff.
Thank you, Stephen. And I will hear from Adam.
Good evening. My name is Scott Haynes. I'm a landscape architect. I work for W&A Engineering, which is located at 355 Avenida Street. Here tonight representing many of the property owners, many of which are here with us in the audience tonight. Our development team, Mallory and Evans, who is also here with us this evening. C3 Design Studio, which is one of our design partners, and our other design partner is Opticos Design out of Berkeley, California. C3 is out of Knoxville. thank staff for their presentations, very thorough. I wanted to go ahead and some of the things I might say might be a little bit redundant to what was said, but I think it's worth hearing again because this is a sort of an unusual approach to some of the things we've done in the past as far as PDs are concerned, primarily with the use of this pattern book. Start with, this was formerly really known as Lakewood. It's going to be difficult for me not to know it as Lakewood because my firm did the original design in 2004 and many of the subsequent amendments. We're calling this the Shoals. So if I slip and call it Lakewood accidentally, please forgive me for that. I'm calling this the Shoals. You can see from this rendering a really nice overview of what we have a dream about for this site and the vision of it. We'll talk about just briefly the vision, how we'd like to implement this plan, talk a little bit about the requested waivers, and then also open it up for discussion as we are here tonight to hear your comments as we move forward to our master plan. So first off, this proposed plan, as mentioned, is divided up into 4 neighborhoods. As you can see here, Arts and Entertainment District, Central Neighborhood, the Peninsula, and the Garden Neighborhood. These are primarily laid out being sensitive to topography. There is a lot of topography on the site, a lot of environmental areas. Also, this is the land that we have to work with right now. This project is reduced from what it was in 2004, various reasons, but primarily, it really suffered during the recession. A lot of this property was pulled apart and had to be reassembled and such. And so we're working with what we have available to really make impact here. And excited about that because there is a lot of great land here to work with, this beautiful piece of property. So start with the Arts and Entertainment District. It's really the gateway to the Shoals. They're comprised of open plazas and commercial mixed use and residential uses, of course, all within walking distance to one another. You can see from the prior slide and staff's presentation, the Greenway, we're pulling that through the central commercial area to try to activate that. There is obviously a more direct route that trail could take up the southern road as it entered the property, but that's fairly steep. And also we feel there's a lot of value in trying to bring it through the general central heart of this commercial area. As you move through the project, you can see this, the central neighborhood, which is made up primarily of single and multifamily residential uses, and including active community amenities. The neighborhood has the widest variety of housing choices of any of the neighborhoods, from small detached units to missing middle types and multifamily options as well. As you progress through what we call the peninsula, features single family attached units that surround neighborhood centers, but then transition to homes that overlook the woods and the water from the peninsula. And then finally, we get to the garden neighborhood. This incorporates less dense single family units that are surrounding the neighborhood center and a small pocket park neighborhood along the perimeter. Now to implement this plan, we've really, with the pattern book, and I invite you to, if you have the pattern book in front of you, pages 22, 23, and 24 might be helpful to follow along as we work through sort of how we're proposing this use. First, starting at the neighborhood scale, really we're requiring a minimum of 3 architectural types for any of these neighborhoods. And in the matrix, you'll see there is a primary style. When I looked at my presentation today, I think we might have a small error in what we call primary for the commercial area. It should be the market warehouse should be the primary style for that instead of the southern particular. That's what's listed in your book. Please note that correction. The primary style would contain at least 50% of the units that would make that up. And then the supplemental styles, which there must be at least 2 more, would be at 10% minimum, so that there's a mix in those different character areas. As we move from that neighborhood scale down to that building scale, we start to get into, I think this is page 23 for you. We start to talk about the different architectural styles that make up these different character neighborhoods. Now, each of the 5 types that we've given for the typical characteristics to define the style, these characteristics are consistent across all the styles, including regulation of roof forms, openings, and claddings. You can see that we are asking for them to be interchangeable. There is, I will say also that all 5 styles are not necessarily applicable to each building type. There are some that are in the Southern vernacular, for instance, All the styles seem to be present, but in Market Warehouse, it's limited. Now, once you've established the architectural style, there's different design elements that can make up and vary those units. So there can be multiple architectural styles of the same type with variations within them. We are putting some guardrails around this, saying that each has to have an entry element and then one form and one one ornamental element or two ornamental elements. So this is so someone can't come through. Let's say we all know that these plans sometimes they aren't completed with their original intent because they change hands. It's not our intent that they change hands, but this has happened. We've seen this. So we want to put guardrails around this so someone can't come in and simply just strip down the facade, make it very plain and ordinary. There are some required elements, but they can be mixed and matched. I'd like to move to the requested waivers. Really, we feel that we appreciate staff's agreement that the ones in green, ones that are supported. We want to talk a little bit about 7, 8, 9 in the brief time that I have. So for the first one, really, we're talking about a building length maximum. We're actually talking about block length maximum. I don't think we have any buildings that are going to be 300 feet long. So it's just not that style of development. That is an error on our part. We're really talking about block length there. If you look, an example of the central neighborhood here, we have a large block length of like 800 plus feet. Typically, that can't be more than 500. And there's also some limitations on block size, which we've also asked for a waiver from. So pardon our typo there, but this was our intent, was to ask for a waiver from the block length and not the building length. Second, we would like to talk about is really where the sidewalks, we've called for some sidewalks to not be required on both sides of the street. And I want to say this is a blanket requirement for the entire development. We're really only asking for this where we have multi-use trail present, primarily through the section that crosses, I say behind the dam, it will not be below the dam. This is really for two reasons. One, sidewalk on that lower southern side really does not access any units, so there wouldn't be of much use, and there'd be a multi-use trail just across the street. Providing a sidewalk in addition to the multi-use trail would widen the section, creating more challenges and more environmental impact through that section because it is environmentally sensitive. So we will define this. I know staff's, I think staff's issue with this was that we weren't very clear in the waiver, that we perhaps could have applied to everything. That's not our intent. We will be more selective and show exactly what we're talking about with that waiver when we come back. Also, there was a number of questions about design things that we were asking for in 925. We understand we have a little more work to do with staff. I'd like to say thank you for staff's willingness to work with us up to this point. We have met with them several times. We plan on meeting with them again as early as next week to try and start sorting some of these things out. And we appreciate their willingness to help us through this. This is quite a different change, I think, from many of the PDs that we see. And so we want to make sure that the design guidelines and the pattern book work together to make a good product at the end of this. And that not only that, but they're easily regulated by staff. We don't want this to be overcomplicated. We want this to be easy for a staff member to evaluate submittals on this and to easily work through the pattern book and say, yes, this works, this works, this works, or not. And so we don't want to overcomplicate things. We want to make it nice and concise. And so we're looking for their guidance next week to help us further refine this book. I'll conclude my comments. I'm going to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. And I invite your comments and look forward to hearing your input on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there wishing to speak in favor of this proposal? And is there any member of the public here wishing to speak in opposition?
Hi, we just moved here a few days ago and we bought a house on Edgewood Drive.
Can you give your name and address, please?
373 Edgewood.
In your name?
Dina Owen. Right. And we found Edgewood Drive so pretty behind all the woods there and nice and quiet. And now we're finding out that there's this major project coming. And I'm not very happy about that, especially there's a high density to it. And all the woods that you're probably going to cut down is full of deer and wildlife, I noticed. And I wished this whole project could be scaled down a bit. And it's going to increase the traffic on our road and on Dicker Road coming up. And I don't know whether that's a good influence for safety issues. So basically, I'm not very happy about this.
Is there any other member of the public here wishing to speak in opposition to this? All right, we will bring it back on. Who wants to start us off?
Scott, you might as well come on up because there's a lot of.
Yeah.
So first, I do want to say that this staff report is kind of amazing. So thank you guys for the work because that's a serious lot of work that you all did. So thank you. And so I guess a couple questions, Scott, on page 24 of the design book. I'm not really clear about whether those elements are allowed or required. And when you then go further into the book, it talks a little bit more about required, like even on that facing page 25, it's under application, it says at a minimum, each building's primary public facing facade must include, so then you get into requirement. So I don't have a problem with any of that, but more just want to point out that that might be something that would be yeah, I'm not sure if you've intended for these on 24 to be required elements or just desired elements.
It'll be a pick and choose. So there's required at least one entryway element. And those entryway elements that are allowed for each of the styles.
Okay.
And then you have to pick, a form element or an ornamental element or two ornamental elements. You get a choice. So it's 1+1 or two of the others. Those are minimum requirements.
Okay, and so I wonder if maybe as you all are thinking about that table in this book, that it might make sense to provide some sort of explanation that essentially that table, what you really need to do is get into the nitty-gritty of each of them to see what's required. Is it kind of different? Like, are you saying generally across the board, there will be X number that are required? Like just two from a list or something like that, or how would a person use that table?
So if you're choosing one of these styles, for instance, Main Street warehouse, then you can choose of the entry elements, any one of those six. You're required to choose one.
Okay, and so maybe just that, the explanation needs to be with that table,
We
right?
can do that. We can
Yeah.
do it. It is listed.
When you get into that
Correct.
later, yeah. And I just wondered, it took me a second to figure that out, and so you might want to have something explanatory on that.
We can write a footnote that maybe pushes you back towards those
Yeah.
requirements where you just list them.
Yeah, something like
Understood.
that to make it a little bit more clear moving forward. And can you clarify this question of number of units versus number of bedrooms? Is this?
We're calling it units right now. This was difficult for us to work through because we are mixing single family, multi-family commercial. It's not defined in one pod's multi and one pod single. So that different than a lot of other cases where it's more clear cut, where we can define those areas and give acreages and bedrooms versus units when it comes to single family, multi-family.
Okay.
We're calling these units right now, not bedrooms. But we're continue to work with staff to try and clarify that language and understanding.
Okay. And then, let's see. Look, I've got more questions, but I'll let others ask their questions because we're gonna come to me as I go.
I did have a couple of questions, Scott, and I realized I forgot to give you your 2-minute rebuttal to be one person who spoke. But I do have a question that is sort of pertinent to her comment about the lovely woods and there's wildlife that lives there and so on. It's a PD that's approved for 173,000 square feet of commercial space, I understand, and a bunch of other dwelling units, right? So nothing that protects it being a forest, but I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what remains to be built under the existing PD, and how it compares to what you're proposing. Because I noted on the staff report at page 4, there's a couple of, there's a table of what's proposed in the way of commercial and apartments is, it says unspecified. So can you just expound on that a little bit? Like, how much commercial and how much residential remains to be built and how that compares in scale to what's proposed?
I need the slide from staff that had the table comparison, if you had it, just to look at what was remaining to be built. I will say, I did want to, if I could take a second to make this one comment too. When we talk about binding plans, it's really not our intent to have a clean slate. It's really not our intent to have a completely unbound plan. The road network, the connections to the street networks around the site and to Barnett Shoals, we believe all those should be fixed. It's really the flexibility within each of those neighborhood pods that we're asking for flexibility, unit types, and even placement, depending on the ones we choose to switch them out. Because of that, it's difficult to say exactly how much commercial square footage we're planning. We want some flexibility because market conditions drive this heavily. And one of the things we found, as you can see from the number of amendments already on this, is that it's very difficult scale to try and pin it down from day one, right? So we're asking for flexibility, and it's difficult for me to answer how much commercial is left. I believe there's going to be a decent amount less commercial than what's shown at 173,000 that's up there now. I think we have about 30,000 shown in some of the 2 buildings that are shown along the entranceway. That's not counting some of the flex space and some of the other food and beverage that might be there. I don't have a hard number on that, but I could probably bring back a range next time we talk about it to give you sort of a better picture of what we feel like would be that sort of sweet spot of what we think it would be. And similar, those are counterpart with the number of units. The densities, again, we're talking about apartments here. I can't remember if that's beds or units in this matrix or not. So it's units. It's units. So probably more residential, less commercial is a general comment for you, but hesitant to really try to pin that down any further to make a mistake and tell you something correct. So.
And are you saying that you all are interested in binding some elements like transportation or is that what you're, or circulation?
Yes.
Or, okay, and so that would include like transportation networks, and would it include sort of buildable area, or does topography kind of dictate that anyway?
It really does. The
Yeah.
topography really does. I mean, we've picked out the developable areas, and everything beyond that is either environmental or very steep slopes that we cannot engineer on. So the road network really does sort of self by its limitations to what's shown here. But if there is pause on that, we want to be able to offer that certainty that this is what we're looking at for the road network. This is the connections that we're looking at on Barnett Shoals, which all, locate themselves really, given the constraints and the existing conditions out there. Kristen.
So question as far as when we're talking about the menus, Scott, who is doing the choosing? Like, and I'm saying this, okay, so stepping back for a minute. So my context for this is Oak Grove, right? And new urbanist design. And I will say, like, if I'm during the pandemic, my family and I picked neighborhoods where we would walk our dog. We would multiple times went to Oak Grove because it was so wonderful to walk around it. That said, you can walk through Oak Grove and know where the original development stopped and where the newer development starts. Just gonna say. So is this idea, like, I'm guessing, we don't have Lucy Rowland here, I'm guessing that when Oak Grove was first conceived, they didn't conceive the entire thing. It was, here's the starting point. It is the staff question, sorry. It's the starting point, and then we're just gonna kind of hope that it continues from here. Whereas in this case, we have here's a concept for the entire space. And then from here, our menus are to help as this plans out, if we sell off parcels, if we do this and that, this is still keeping within this design, period.
So your question, who's doing the choosing?
Yes.
Whoever's doing the choosing.
Okay.
And the market is helping guide those decisions. That said, that's why the pattern book is so important, to make sure we have the elements in there and the guardrails that we'll continue to work with staff to make sure those are secure. Because we hope that Mallory and Evans develops this entire neighborhood. But I can't promise that just because I can't see the future, but it is our hope, it's their hope as well as ours. See what happens. If it doesn't happen, we need to make sure that the pattern book stands up and that you don't have this large deviation in style where you go from one neighborhood and then you hit the wall and you're like, what happened here? So again, working with staff, making sure that that's clear, but we hope we put enough together in the style book that helps keep that intact and that spirit and intent hold. Did I answer your question?
It did, yeah. And if I could just add one thing in the spirit of like, so yes, I think my only two big question marks, and it's, which is crazy because this is so comprehensive and I really appreciate everything all done. My two question marks were, what is happening with our intersection with Barnett Hills? Like what do those connections look like? Like where other stop lanes are there, like, you know, like how are those connections happening? And for the commercially type areas, maybe just more of a sense of where like I don't know, like kind of where the commercial is. I did appreciate like the live work spaces. Oh my God, we need so much of that in Clarke County. That would be amazing. But like, as far as like gathering spaces, like if I wanted to plan to walk our dog, where would we go and just go to hang out in this neighborhood?
So if we look at this, first off, we don't have any traffic lights planned. The traffic report did not warrant those.
Okay.
The intersections are aligned with, especially one of the south carriage lanes, trying to make sure we have good alignment there, the traffic engineering. The main heart, I think, of the commercial, there's really two main nodes, really. The one in the south, sort of a smaller food and beverage type that we see in that corner. But really the main face of the commercial is that center.
Right.
We're actually asking for that to be private in that section as opposed to a public street. And the reason is that we can have a little more freedom in how that street is used, primarily being able to close it down for events if we'd like. Look at the cross section of that road, calling for it to be a really nice roll curve, not strict high back curve, trees in the center with pavers, all very much in the same grade, not flat. It's going to have about 4% so elevation as it rises, but across it in the cross section, no curve to navigate, so it's flat. So if you do choose to shut it down for an event, you have that option, can turn into an extended plaza space. So I think that though will be what you're asking for, is you come to that intersection, that Y intersection and that first thoroughfare, that's really the heart of the commercial area. Although there's going to be some little pockets too that'll be secondary commercial experiences.
Right, Alex and then Sheila.
This is actually a little bit of a staff question, but whomever has the answer, go for it. So again, a project this large doesn't get built at once. I'm not hexing the project, but in 4 years it's dead. Whatever was built's good. Massive economy break. The far part is not developed, and then the whole project sells to somebody else. Somerville went through this where the original homes were higher quality than the new set that I've noticed. It's not the same. So I'm looking at staff on this. But I could describe them exactly the same. But you can easily look at that one, and go, that one was the original high quality, this is the original not high quality. Is there any protection in any of this? Can we avoid that? Or is that just the way we deal with something this large? We just hope that doesn't happen. And we hope if it does turn over to a new developer, that they're gonna keep the standard.
You're hitting on the main issue and question that we've had, and to their credit, the design team has heard that from us as well, that same question over the past several months. And for ongoing conversation. That's our goal, is to land on something that lives past this current design team, should that be the reality. And that we have a lot of lessons learned in Athens of great starts that have hit the mark in phases 1 and 2, and then because the regulatory teeth weren't there to mandate the sameness of what happened in 1 and 2, we lost some things. And some of it was kind of a value engineering, and there are other things that came into play. Our goal with this is to have that bar set firmly so that the product remains consistent regardless of who's doing it. That's what's the challenge, right? Is how to word that to both be flexible and also be predictable. Those two things tend to be mutually exclusive. We'll see where we get, but you know, Scott, you may want to comment on this. You already have. I think it was in the staff presentation as well. We're still working towards that goal. The design book is great. I mean, it presents a lot of things, but when you actually begin to think about implementation, I think staff's concern right now is that it maybe doesn't prescribe enough. So we're working on it.
Okay, no, that's good. And then just last thing on that. I will say, as a realtor, that part of town, that piece of that road needs adult grown-up living. It's primarily student housing. I'm not against it. I mean, the Summit and across the street, they're pretty high-end student living. But I would like to be able to put clients there. I think and this is a nice variety. So I'd love to bring you more negative that you can really take back to the office and work on. But I think in general, what this does for that area is going to be very nice to finish off all of that. So congratulations on, at least from my point of view, the concept and idea. It's going to do well over there.
Overall, I think this is an exciting project, particularly for the east side. I especially value the variety of building type, 15 different types of buildings from what I've read. And also the variety of price points, which I think is very important. So those are positives. My questions are two. On page 22, there's information about the primary, primary styles. And there's a range of 50 to 70% primary style in each neighborhood. It seems to me like there's a significant difference between 50 and 70%. So that's something, you know, and just want more information on, or as plans go forward, you know, what does that mean in practice? So could you address that 50 to 70%?
It means that at least half of those, it's in an effort to try and maintain a primary character within those neighborhoods.
Okay.
It's just speaking stylistically, not necessarily of the unit that could go there. There's another matrix that shows within those styles which units are appropriate. which unit types are appropriate. But it's really an effort to try and maintain central character and which could be up to 70%, allowing for a little bit of room for some slight variation in those other two required types, which have, at least 10% have to be, if we went 70% main character, and of the two others, 10%, have at least 20 of the other to make it. So it's really an effort to try and maintain a cohesive kind of central character in that.
Thank you. And then my second question is, I'm intrigued by the naming of what I believe will be the first part to be developed, which is the Arts and Entertainment District. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Could you say a little bit more about the intention behind that name, Arts and Entertainment District?
I think it's where you're going to find the most activity within the development. It's where your restaurants would be, your food and beverage type things. It's where you find the most activity, like sort of community in the project. So that image reflects that, I believe, a bit.
Thank you.
I want to ask one quick question on that arts and entertainment.
Sure, that's fine. Alex, and then Sarah, and then me.
So why arts?
My arts?
Yeah. I mean, you explain kind of the entertainment part. I'm just curious. I don't.
Well, I mean, it's a solvable question for me. It's because art, aesthetic, important. And things that are beautiful tend to have sustainability. I think there's a great value to making things beautiful. I think in this country, we do some of that sometimes. That's why we're so a lot of the things we do, including architecture. So I think there's an emphasis to sort of reinforce the need for aesthetic beauty in that area, calling it arts and entertainment.
Thanks.
Sarah.
Okay, few different things. One, in the entryway elements, in the design book, and I'm sorry if anything I'm asking here is something that is addressed in the design book. I just didn't find it.
There's a lot in there, so no worries.
For something like the balcony, if the balcony is an entryway, is a used entry element, is that a functional balcony, or someone just do like a little fake railing thing?
Question I'll take back to my architects and let them give you a better answer. I apologize for not being able to clearly answer for you, but I will make sure we get it addressed for you, that question.
Yeah, no worries. I figured that any question that the answer isn't known is just like also maybe a note for the design book, the use of it.
Yeah, real balcony or something like a Juliet is what you're asking.
Yeah. So I do feel like the entryway elements are like, and I think I noted something like this in the staff report, where the staff report mentioned the idea of having porches be a requirement, just to have that place outside the house where people can be and relax. So that was one. Another is in the neighborhoods outside of the Arts and Entertainment District. I was really, really excited to see the live work flex spaces in all of them. All of them, I think. This one, it's kind of hard to tell because of where the binding is, but and as we're talking about ways to utilize the design book to make it a good master plan for the future, I note that there's a minimum number of building types, the building types plans, to keep that variety going, which is awesome. And I wonder if some amount of live work flex space could be kind of locked down in each one, because that's the only semi-commercial space that I see. And so it feels important to have that be a type that is represented. I thought. And is there any part of the design standards that address the backs of the buildings, especially when in the arts and entertainment district in areas where there are these large parking lots.
I'm prepared with some information on those questions.
In the spirit, is it okay if I
Yeah.
have?
Oh.
Sorry.
Yeah.
In the spirit of what Sarah was just saying too, because I noticed in some categories, like say, for example, mixed use, you have a brick option and maybe this is like metal vertical siding. Again, just in the spirit of like keeping everybody honest down the road if it changes hands. I could see maybe not opting for a brick because there's a higher cost involved and maybe opting for different materials. So maybe there's like a certain standard of like a minimum versus maximum. I know it's very difficult because you don't want to be like super like this has to be this has to be this. But again, just thinking about ways that down the road things could be skirted around to then you suddenly have no brick in a style designation that could have had brick and would have added to the character of the neighborhood. So.
I'm waiting because I can see your writing. Are you done jotting down the notes?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So a few comments. First of all, like overview, I love this project. I think it's really exciting and the work that the applicant submitted reflects a tremendously well thought out project already at this stage and a lot of great work. And I'll echo what Sarah Beresford said about the staff report too, reflecting a lot of really great work as well. So thank you for that. On the subject of the substituting the design book for our ordinances version of a design book, I take it that staff's concern is, will these design standards protect Athens-Clarke County's interest in like aesthetic, good-looking buildings as well as our current ordinance does? And in thinking about that, I think it's not clear to me that our current ordinance necessarily does an impeccable job of that, right? I mean, it's an effort, but it's just, it's a limitation of writing ordinances, right? It's not the planning staff's fault as it is the difficulty of writing good legal ordinances that micromanage architects and dictate you have to use a certain number of porches, balconies, this and that, sorts of design elements. It's just hard to do that in a way that doesn't just end up throttling development by making it micromanaged and overly expensive. And then still the outputs end up being not very satisfactory to a lot of people, right? I think that's just kind of a problem that, so I'm very sympathetic to the project that y'all are trying to do and to the idea behind not subjecting this project to the existing ordinance in section 9-25 I think 8 to the design standards in there, which often output a lot of really crummy looking buildings that get built in Athens-Clarke County today, right? Unfortunately. And I think the idea, I take it, is to offer a better set of design elements that's more in keeping with the style that this developer is trying to do. And so I'm very sympathetic to that. I understand staff's concern about, we don't want to just give them carte blanche, and we want to make sure that Athens-Clarke County's interest in aesthetically good buildings are protected. And so I guess I would just say and this is a comment for staff and for the applicant as you guys go forward and develop this into something that we'll be voting on and then the mayor and commission will be voting on, that I would encourage staff to just focus on if the design book, the next iteration of this that y'all see, is missing some things that are current or not is it perfect, not is it exactly the design book we would make, but rather is it missing anything that our current ordinance that they're asking for an exception from would provide, right? Does it not provide as good a product as what our some aspect of our current ordinance. If that's the case, then I would encourage you all to work together to try to address those concerns. But I think in general, I'm just skeptical of the idea that planners, micromanaging architects produces better looking buildings, right? I think often the opposite is true. And so I take this developer, just from what I've seen so far, to be trying to do something really good. And I think, for example, that like what Kristen said about Oak Grove and some other projects in Athens, we do rely on the good faith of the developer and the good intentions of the developer to try to produce a really good looking product. Because even any set of design elements that we modify, a developer that's looking to do it on the cheap is going to find a way to comply with the elements and still do it on the cheap and have it not look as good, right? And so I think it's ultimately a problem that can't be entirely legislated. And I say that as a lawyer. We cannot write an ordinance or a design book that will make a bad, cheap developer produce good product, right? And so we've got to, at the end of the day, count on the developer's good intentions and willingness to spend the extra money to make a great looking product that will pay off presumably in higher profits for them because people will pay more money for that great looking product, right? So at the end of the day, I would just say that Athens-Clarke County staff, us, the mayor and commission, if this gets approved, we're going to have to just rely to some degree on the good faith of the developer and on their profit motive to produce a good looking product. Because I don't think that we can micromanage our way to really high quality, great looking stuff. So that was one just kind of overall comment on that. I had a couple of other smaller comments that in looking at them, I think they're more for staff and they're more for staff of other departments. And so I think I won't raise them now. I did wonder one thing about the requested waiver number 1, which is for some reason, because we hate townhomes in Clarke County, we have an ordinance that says you can't do townhomes in single family districts unless they're like a couple hundred feet from the property line, right? You can't do infill townhomes. We don't allow them. They're illegal in most districts because of this buffer requirement. So the applicant's requesting a waiver from section 9-7-2's buffer requirement for attached single family. And I was surprised to see staff say, we don't think this is necessary because we're going to regulate this as these townhomes, these single family attached fee simple units, we're going to regulate those as multifamily. I think that's great. I love that development. That I think has not historically been the approach that the planning department has taken when somebody wants to do attached single family on fee simple lots rather than like a multifamily situation. And so I just wanted to be clear, is that sort of is that the opinion of the planning department going forward, or is there something about this particular project that makes you say, even though they're doing them on fee simple lots where they can be sold individually, you're not going to regulate them as attached single family, you're going to regulate them as under our multifamily?
Let me start by saying, I think it's good that the waiver called out. We may have overstated that it's unnecessary. I think it probably is necessary. So that's maybe a reach. To bring some clarity to exactly what you're pointing out so that we don't trip on an interpretation down the road that makes an otherwise good idea somehow illegal. So I think we're comfortable with the waiver for a few reasons. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. So staff supports the waiver, but you do think it probably is necessary. Okay, I just
clarity. Yeah,
that's helpful. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I got.
Can I? Okay.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna, to tie it together a little bit. I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the pattern book, and that for good reason. That's a really interesting thing. It's relatively unique. We've had very few projects that have proposed a pattern book, and none of them is as robust as this. So there's really 2 issues though that they're asking for. One is the pattern book in lieu of a whole chapter, essentially, of code. The other is not having a binding plan and with a PD. And so that's a departure from what we do, and it's a departure from the way the ordinance is worded. It's a requirement of the ordinance. So one of the things in those two pockets, we're not trying, it's hard to regulate good taste. It's hard to write rules that produce an architectural product at the end of the line that everybody agrees to and points to and says that's a success. So I don't think we've set the bar there. I think what we're trying to do is create something that can be consistent. So for the pattern book, I think from a staff standpoint, we're less intimidated by the pattern book. We work with design guidelines all the time, and we have lots of peer communities that we can and have looked into on lessons learned and how to do this well. And it's a great team we're working with, so it's a win-win-win. I think the side that is interesting and we want to make sure we're getting right is if we aren't going to have a binding plan in the traditional sense, if we have a roadway network that would be binding and those points of interconnection are binding, that's great. That's a good start. But I think to hit at the spirit of what the PD code in Athens-Clarke County asks for and to navigate the predictability with the flexibility, you're going to need something that's binding and has some rules with regard to massing, scale, placement, orientation, and open space. Those 5 components, if we can write some rules on those, and that's not even talking about architecture. That's architecture to some degree is ornamentation. But massing, scale, placement, orientation, and open space, if we get those rules written well, then we can have flexibility and I think have predictability in equal measure, and address the spirit of a binding plan, because what's binding are those rules. So I don't think we said that clearly enough to you, but I was looking to see if everybody was kind of nodding their head with that idea, because I think that's critical guidance to give them tonight, that you're comfortable with that idea. Because if you're not, we really need to hear it tonight.
Yeah, speaking only for myself, I'm quite comfortable with that, and I appreciate that additional.
Okay, so it's really two things we're talking about in a big way.
I think the comment I was gonna make, sorry if I'm jumping into.
No, Sarah, and then
Okay.
I think Alex.
You kind of were getting at it, Bruce, which is that the thing that to me is kind of missing, unless it's here and I missed it, is like a written description that includes like required elements of the different parts of the development. Like when I look at the arts and entertainment district, for example, and I was thinking about that after you were describing sort of the idea behind there, is that that's actually not captured anywhere. And when you look at that, when I look at that concept, I see a lot of parking lots. My first thought was, okay, so I was thinking like green space, open space, festival space, gathering space, that would be, that district would have that in it. But when you look at that concept plan, that's a lot of pavement. And so is there a way to like, it's like we're missing something between the sort of description of the overall intention of the project versus, and then the nitty gritty design book. But to me, there's this like description of these different components and sort of the spirit behind them, but then also like the required elements of them. Like, so that we make sure, because these aren't, you know, if you imagine a scenario where the only thing that's binding is your transportation network, then you wouldn't be able to determine anything related to how much pavement is there and how much green space is there. So I think it might be a matter of, yeah, defining what those elements are that, besides just the housing types, that create what you want to create in that area. I don't exactly know what those are, what those elements are, but my first thought is sort of gathering spaces, dog parks, playgrounds, like that there's a certain minimum that has to be met no matter what. Maybe without prescribing placement, but just saying these things have to exist. Is that sort of what you're getting at, Bruce, or is it more?
That's exactly.
Okay,
Yeah, so the image on the screen. You know,
right.
does it have to be binding in that we get that arrangement of pathways and that amount of green space and that height of building? And no, however, what makes that work and appealing, but let's focus on really just function, is that there's placement rules that you can lift from that. There's orientation rules that you can lift from that. The relationship of the two of buildings one to another, the rhythm of the buildings, the interaction with the sidewalk, those are all rules that are apart from architectural style. And I think we can write those rules and regulate that and create a bit of a cookbook that will allow us to have the predictability plus flexibility, right? And that's not a totally new practice. What would be new is putting into something that replaces a section of code. Usually it sits on top, right? Or where something falls short, we still have the safety net of whatever the code says. If this thing was silent, we still have standards. This is a different ask. This is saying, no safety net anymore. This is the thing. So we can do it, but I think we have to break it down into its elements, build it back up. And I think the team's been really good about thinking about it that way.
In one of the staff comments, this is sort of related, but not, I don't know how related it is, but the comment number, I don't remember, something of, oh, I know where it is. On page 11, there's sort of this bulleted list under item 5 of what needed to be included. Like, one of my first thoughts, I don't think that my opinion about design styles is necessarily relevant. I did sort of raise my eyebrow when I saw that the center neighborhood is dominated by the Tudor style, because I don't see that. That to me doesn't, it seems a little bit unexpected, maybe, for lack of a better word, but I do think I'm not opposed to a different style, but when you look at like examples of Tudor, you seldom see a front porch. You might see like a recessed entry, but you don't see a porch. And so I think when staff is talking about things like porches on recessed entries should be mandatory in all structures, I'm not sure if they should be mandatory in all structures, but could be an element that's prescribed in some way. Like that, if the idea being that you're trying to, I think it's kind of getting at trying to figure out some formula that could be used that there, for every certain number of units, there's this type of green space between them, or some percentage of the, I actually really don't know how you do that, but a certain number of them, or a certain portion of them need to have a front porch, because the idea behind this part of the development is to encourage neighbors interacting with each other in the front of their spaces. But I think in some ways that's kind of what staff is getting at in those bullets for 5. And it might also, staff's item number 16, drive-through facilities should be prohibited or restricted, which I think based on our recent conversation here, I think that seems pretty reasonable, that if we're trying to facilitate like pedestrian uses, right, we don't want a ton of that, but in that same vein, are there certain uses that you prohibit that would also encourage this thing that you want? Whatever that might be.
Alex,
It was answered. Sorry.
other comments?
I just had a comment. Unless I missed it, I didn't see anything about like environmentally sustainable features. Are they included in this development, or is that? I didn't see any notation.
You're asking about a commitment to say a LEED standard or something, no.
Okay.
I think that there are sustainable design practices that we are denser development within these nodes, allowing for protection of the environmental areas, steep slopes and things of those, trying to be less impactful overall and pocketed, those types of practices.
Okay.
Building practices we're not proffering. Certification.
Gotcha. Thanks. Sarah Beresford reminded me of where the discussion points in the staff report were. I'm particularly interested of how public transit is to be accommodated. And to Bruce's kind of broader discussion, that seems like something that should be addressed in whatever is created in lieu of a binding site plan, which I'm very excited to see what y'all come up with for that. And drive-through facilities should be prohibited or at least restricted as standalone uses. I mean, that seems like a no-brainer to me with the vision that I'm seeing here. The drive-through should be prohibited, but also that opens up to like, are there any other uses that should use types be laid out more specifically? That's all.
Any other comments or questions for the
Big one, when I look at the image on the screen, I don't necessarily get the feeling that that gives me when I look at this. So something I think needs to bridge that gap that could be a part of a binding site plan. For example, when I looked at the Arts and Entertainment District, I could put my finger on it right now. Yes, there was a public plaza. And I said, oh, I didn't notice that before. You know, it's not listed with what's in the Arts and Entertainment District. So some of those elements I think are very important to call out and to make a part of the binding site plan.
Any other comments or questions? All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Text amendment?
Yeah. We'll take a minute on that. Happy to answer any questions, but just quick overview. The next item is some text amendments to chapter 927 that deal with inclusionary zoning. This section of code was really started to be talked about 3 years ago, and came into being about 2 years ago. And we've had a little bit of time to work with it, and we've realized some things that we wish were different. And in trying to make it maybe a little more applicable and brought into current terms, things have even changed just in the 2 years. So the cover memo summarizes those. The attachment is the actual meat of the proposed text amendments. Some of the highlights of those changes, though, are cleaning up some definitions, making it really clear that this is dealing with rental properties right now. The programmatic intent was to not stop just with rental properties, but also to look at fee simple products as well for some degree of inclusionary program inclusion. But right now, we're still at the rental moment, and that's what we're trying to regulate. The folks that have come forward, the developers that have come forward and try to work with the ordinance have had some point of confusion. Mostly that unique Athens thing where we have units and we have bedrooms. What do we mean? So let's clear that up. So that's what this does. Multifamily development and rental projects. Thanks, Rick. We're counting bedrooms. That's what we're talking about. And then also indexing our rents against the HUD program that it should be indexed against. This brings a lot of precision to that from the financial side that helps front load these discussions with developers. The whole point of this text that we have is that it's relatively easy to administer. It's something we can talk about early on in a project and have a developer understand, because it is voluntary, and we want to encourage it. So we're going to get more people participating if they feel comfortable with it and not intimidated by things that don't quite add up. To that end, there's also the land use restriction agreement. How that factors into the development review process was important to bring some clarity to. Folks were a little fuzzy on that. So all of these text amendments are meant to create some success and respond to some things that we've experienced in real time. So happy to answer any question.
And so just to clarify that, the item number 4 is the idea is that if somebody doesn't own the property yet, they can't use a land use restriction agreement, but that there has to be something in place kind of provisionally while they're in the process of MOD. Obtaining this, I guess this is going with attaining this approval, that it gives them something to put in place.
That's right. So if you have a property owner and you have a developer coming in, there's that moment where that developer and design team is acting on behalf of that or with the property owner's permission. And they're working towards some real estate transaction. If that real estate transaction involves a bump in density through the inclusionary zoning provisions, that's a huge deal. And if it doesn't work out, it completely changes the project. So the notion of this agreement is to, at that moment in time, provide some assurance before you've made it to permit that this is what we're going to get. And we can lean on that. Should there be a change in development or owner structure or whatever, we still have that agreement that somebody can come back to. Provides protection for both sides.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah. So that's still, at that point, that's still an agreement between ACC and the applicant.
With the owner's consent.
Yeah.
So it's all the parties involved saying, yes, this is what's happening.
That there would be some provision in there that says, basically, if this ends up being a go, this needs to turn into a land use restriction agreement.
Correct.
Okay.
I've got just a technical question. We're talking about, it was low and moderate. Now it's very low and low. Terminology is very low. New, is this made up by Athens-Clarke County? Is that a federal term?
Yeah, the terminology is back indexed against the terminology used by HUD.
That's a HUD statement.
It is, and that was a point of confusion. I think in the writing of this original ordinance, there was some well-intended language that didn't necessarily square with federal wording. And it was done in a way to kind of help make it a little more palatable for adoption. Not a bad reason to word things a certain way. What we found is it just didn't sync with HUD.
Yeah, I was just taught in English not to use very, that like as a descriptive, like, and I was just curious.
Like super extra?
Why did very, yeah, I mean, it should have, very could mean a lot of things in English. I almost asked Alice Kidman, I was discussing things with her yesterday and I was like, what do you think about the word very in here? But since that's a HUD thing, it's out of my reach, so I'll go along with it.
It is actually less confusing, apparently, with that change.
Yeah, what Bruce said is exactly right. And very low in HUD's terminology means household income below 50% of the area.
No, I've read it.
Low
Yeah.
means below 80, the area median, which raises something I wanted to flag, Bruce, because there's a couple places that the ordinance as written and even post amendment refers to 60 and 80% income families. But if we're switching over to the HUD terms of very low and low, I would think that we would need to mirror those definitions and be 50 and 80, not 60 and 80.
And that's a fair point. Actually, our administrator in HCD picked up on that. And yesterday had sent him an email asking, should we be adjusting this? And he said he was looking into it.
Okay.
So you're spot on. And the original answer I got, the author of this is actually now our acting assistant county manager, Andrew Saunders. And I think at the time that this was written, 80/60 as called out in the home program documentation was still correct. I think. So we're going to make sure this has been sitting for a minute. So we're going to make sure that it is supposed to be 60 or is it supposed to be 50?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I think I don't think we're gonna vote on this tonight, but just, I just wanted to flag that, because there's like in 9-27-2 on page, I guess they're not numbered, but in 9-27-2, the definition section, affordable rent is defined as, monthly rent can't be more than 1/12 of 30% of 80% for low income or 60% for very low income. And my understanding is that HUD's very low income definition is 50, not 60. So I think that's one place, but that's not the only place. There's 4 or 5 other places where we talk about 60% in here, just for the reasons you mentioned, like in 9-27-5, the table that gives the incentives and the density bonuses, the 2 little footnotes with asterisks refer to, or the second footnote says very low income below 60%. So anyway, just harmonizing that across the document. Yeah, there's a couple other places. I won't flag them all, but if you're looking at it, I did, I mean, I can give them to you. I've circled some, I may have missed 1 or 2, but I'll give it to you and if it's useful.
I'd like that. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. And then, one thing I didn't totally understand. I'm not sure I could explain to the room, what this dwelling unit versus unit, what's being attempted here. Like, I understand that Clarke County's existing ordinance, not just the inclusionary zoning, but everything defines units differently for multifamily versus for single family, by the bedroom, by family, and by the, home.
Even if you build a single family home and multifamily, we count the bedrooms.
Right.
It doesn't change it from being a single family home, but.
Right. And so when we, so the change that you're making here, I understand is trying to clarify, which is which. And I guess in trying to wrap my head around what y'all are doing here, it would just be helpful to know what's the confusion that developers have had when they went to talk to HCD about opting into this ordinance. What is it that they were confused by?
So maybe a way to describe it, I don't know that I'm going to stick the landing on this. But if you have units and you have a unit mix, like our code requires, you can only have so many units that have 4 bedrooms. Some developers are trying to figure out the math on rents per bedroom in a unit type and then the square footage and the construction, and there's all kinds of moving parts to that. In other communities that have inclusionary zoning, and that's a key thing to point out, the developers that are working with this tend to have dealt with it elsewhere. And elsewhere, the math is a little easier because other places, not college towns, just say units. They're not sweating the bedrooms. For us, the bedroom count still matters by code. And we're still trying to do this as a by right thing. So we're trying to lift the way we regulate everything else in multifamily and keep it consistent. So if somebody is running the numbers, trying to do it by bedroom, allows for, it's different. So we may need to make it super clear because it can be confusing. And then second of all, how we're going to give you your density bonus is by bedroom. It's not by units. So if you're going to do, and which can be very helpful, and the folks that have talked to us and figured that out have really liked it because they're going to do their rents by the bedroom. So it tends to work with their pro forma better when they have that conversation. So going by bedroom, and then that allows them to kind of mix and match a little bit. If they've done it by bedroom, then they can have a series of 2-bedroom units, and if they want, and it starts to make sense, then they get into construction. We're looking at it, maybe a 3-bedroom comes in here and you end up with a studio. Well, the bedroom units haven't changed. The calculus for the inclusionary zoning hasn't changed, but they've been able to modify their project in real time and not have to sweat units.
Okay, so if they're doing an RM2 development where they can build 24 bedrooms as of right, the table says they get a 50% bonus if they opt in, so this tells them it's 50% more than 24 bedrooms per acre, so you get 36 bedrooms per acre now if you opt into that. The unit mix of the affordable units is still going to the extent practicable, match the unit mix of the market rate units, right? You're not trying to change that. Like if they do.
That's right.
Half 1-bedrooms and half 3-bedrooms, then the affordable units would be half 1s and half 3s, or, so they can't just do studios as affordable units.
That's right.
Okay.
So we're trying to just deal with this as rent, correct? Not buying and selling.
Right.
Okay, so I don't know if this is right or wrong, but it does look like it should be maybe taken out under section 927(2), same one, but under the definition affordable, which is the first little paragraph, says affordable means rented at an affordable rent or sold. And then whether that you're taking out the next paragraph that talks about sales price. Does sold need to come out, or does it need to stay in just to protect something else?
Yeah, we can. Let me ask about that. I don't know whether that was left in there to anticipate condominium style.
Yeah, to me, it's either keeping a foot in the door so it doesn't slam.
Let me double check. I mean, I know we're taking out fee simple, and that's pretty consistent throughout. That's a good catch. And there had been a discussion about the notion that if you have a project that is built as multifamily with one owner, and that owner in year 20 decides to condominiumize a portion, how does that work? And I don't know that I'm answering the question, but it's a reason to chase down and answer that.
Well, I'm just kind of bringing it up.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
Does the state of Georgia limit the length of a land use restriction agreement? Like, is there any long-term affordability minimum?
30?
I can answer that, because we looked into that extensively with the advice of the attorney's office when we were drafting the ordinance. And it doesn't say that longer than 20 is not okay, but it does say that up to 20 years is unquestionably okay. So we knew we were on completely solid ground to make it be at least 20 years. I think there's a very strong argument that it says that longer than 20 years, if I'm not going to quote it exactly, but longer than 20 years is only permissible for a land use restriction agreement in favor of like a municipality or an entity of the state government in pursuit of a public purpose. And so the argument is affordable housing is an obviously legitimate public purpose for the government to try to achieve. And so we thought we can probably make them 50 years if we want in pursuit of that. But, you know, it's at least debatable that
20 is more defensible.
20 is unquestionably a slam dunk. Infinity is probably okay as long as a judge decides that affordable housing for individuals counts as a public purpose.
Still waiting for that rule. Well, we can definitely receive comment, make edits, have it back to you in September. That's y'all's comfort. That's fine.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that brings us to the final section, other business, training on variance appeal procedures.
Very brief refresher of something we went over earlier this year. No doubt most of you will probably remember this.
So in terms of like where the authority is, it's section 948 of the Code of Athens-Clarke County. That section basically says that there are two types of actions that can be appealed to this body. The first is a staff permit decision that was made pursuant to section 947. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And the other type of action that this body has a jurisdiction to hear appeals over is a type 4 planning action. In most cases, those tend to be variance requests. Okay, so when it comes to staff permit decisions that are appealable to this body, really the only type of permit decision that this body will see on an appeal is a staff permit decision that's related to a preliminary plat that has 5 or more subdivisions or lots. The overwhelming majority of staff permit decisions in Athens-Clarke County are appealable directly to the AHO, the Administrative Hearing Officer. It's the same individual who's appointed by the Mayor and Commission to serve as the municipal court judge. Let's see. Okay. Now, when it comes to type 4 planning actions, as I said, most often that's going to come in the form of a variance. Mike is very familiar with variances, having served on the hearings board. Section 946 kind of talks about which types of planning actions follow the type 4 procedure, but for the most part, it's either going to be a variance that is not subject to the staff review process or an action that is specifically permitted in Title IX as a type 4, unless it's a planning action that's initially considered by this body as a type 3. You know, that can be a little bit confusing, but I don't think those are very common. The good news is that regardless of what type of appeal is being filed, the procedure is pretty much the same. The applicant has 5 business days to file the appeal after the date of the final action. It has to be in writing, has to include certain things such as the name, the appellant's name, has to state with specificity the actual basis that the action is to be appealed, whether that's substantive or procedural. So in terms of what type of information you are allowed to consider for the appeal, the ordinance, section 948 basically says that this body has a right to have the entire record of the lower body. And so hypothetically, if you were hearing a variance appeal from the hearings board, you would be entitled to any evidence that the hearings board considered, which means the staff report, any evidence that was submitted by the applicant or folks in the audience who gave comment for or against, any stipulations, the relevant code sections, et cetera. And the record's important because under 948B2 subsection E, your decision on the appeal is based solely on the information that's in the record. And so you're not allowed to consider any new evidence, like hearing new testimony, or even public comment for that matter, because that's information that's not in the record. But you are allowed to ask questions of staff, applicant, the attorneys, if you have any questions about information that's presented to y'all. And I think normally that information goes out with the planning packet for the upcoming meeting. In terms of the procedure, each side basically has 10 minutes to present their argument, very similar to hearings you hear on rezones. As I said, you can ask questions of staff, applicants, attorneys, and the applicant is entitled to a rebuttal, just like they are with a rezone hearings. So in terms of the questions that you need to be thinking about for the appeal, did the applicant follow the right procedure? Did the hearings board follow the right procedure? The ordinance basically says that the planning commission has to review the record for sufficiency of the evidence. In Georgia, the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court have basically equated the any evidence standard with the sufficiency of evidence standard. There was some correspondence that went back and forth the last appeal. I'll probably forward that to this body again, just so y'all can have the benefit of that legal advice. But essentially, if there is any evidence in the record that supports the lower board's decision, then under the any evidence standard, you are required to affirm that decision, even if the evidence is somehow conflicting, or if you don't necessarily agree with the evidence. If there's any evidence in the record
then under the standard for these appeals, the appeal should be affirmed. In terms of your options, they're up here on the board, so you can, affirm the original planning action. You can affirm it and add conditions. You can deny it altogether, or you can just send it back to the lower board for further development of the record if you find that something is missing or if you need more information before you can make a decision. Before you leave that slide, can you speak to what conditions would be acceptable? So the ordinance is pretty vague. It doesn't say it has to be a certain type of condition. So anything, like any type of condition that this body would deem appropriate. But appropriate in that it relates to the nature of the variance or? Right. So it's assuming it's a variance appeal. Yeah, it would have to be relevant to the actual request of the applicant, relevant to the variance. It couldn't be something that's not related to what's being appealed.
One clarifying question about that insufficiency of the evidence, any evidence standard. You said you're going to forward the correspondence that we have from last, but it was my understanding that even the Georgia Court of Appeals case that says that the insufficiency of the evidence standard is satisfied if there's any evidence means not just any evidence, but any evidence that would be sufficient for a reasonable person to think supports the other decision, right? So like, I can imagine a situation where there was more than zero evidence, but not enough evidence that a reasonable person could conclude something. Like if you told me, well, the earth is flat, look, here's a picture of a really large area where it looks flat. Somebody would say, well, that photo is evidence, right? It's a photo, it's evidence, it's a document, it's a thing. It provides evidence of the earth being flat. And yet I think we could still conclude that a reasonable person couldn't rely on that photo as being sufficient. And as you said, the Athens-Clarke County ordinance we're applying on appeal procedure says we review for sufficiency of the evidence to support a reasonable person in reaching the conclusion. So I can imagine a circumstance where the hearings board makes an unreasonable decision. No offense, Mike. Now that you're not there. Where the hearings board makes an unreasonable decision, but there's some evidence, but our conclusion is it's not that there's zero evidence, it's that there's the tiniest little sliver of evidence and we don't think that the decision they made was reasonable in light of that tiny little sliver of evidence. And so my understanding is that even with that Georgia Court of Appeals case in mind, we'd still be correct in reversing in that. It's a small set of cases, but there's something where there's more than zero, but less than enough evidence for a reasonable person.
I don't know that that's how we interpret it, so I'll definitely follow up in writing. But I think what I would say is the way that the standard has evolved through the years, and it is very confusing, I will admit that. We spent a lot of time researching this. It's a very deferential standard. So if there's any evidence in the record to support that, I think the idea is that you would defer to the lower body that actually heard the entire proceeding. Even if you disagree with the weight of the evidence, if there's any evidence, that's how we interpret it to be. But we'll follow up with you in writing.
Okay, thank you.
This is a different way of thinking. The way the hearings board has to think and the way this body would be asked to think in hearing an appeal is different than the conversational nature that you all are used to. And so when we have appeals, I think it'll be our practice, unless there's some extraordinary circumstance, to do the appeal first, the first item of the meeting, to avoid that sort of kind of mental confusion of, hey, we just had a great conversation about a design guideline. Now we're going to be judges and adjudicate an appeal. I think that's unfair to you. So whenever we have one of these, we're going to take a minute during agenda review and we can do a bit of a primer on what's about to happen. Here's what's in front of you. Here's your role, just to kind of get your head in the game. And then we'll make that the first item so that you come like right out of the tunnel and you're ready to go on that appeal way of thinking. I can't say it enough because the temptation is to kind of talk to people and sort it out. This is different. So it's the record. It's only the record. And sometimes the record isn't all that you'd want it to be. And the temptation is to kind of fill in the gaps or the things you think are gaps. Or, gosh, I wish I was at that meeting. So one of the things that we've tried to make a practice is to provide the video. So you will see the deliberation. You won't have to imagine how it went. So you'll get to see body language. You'll get to hear the comments. You'll get to hear the whole thing. It won't just be some transcription and that's emotionless and that kind of thing. You get the whole event as it played out. So I think that's helpful. And sometimes that helps people relax. Like, oh, okay, now I see, because you actually did see what they talked about.
I saw it from the other side once. We did have I can't remember how long ago it was, but we had a hearings board decision. It was appealed from the planning commission. And then it was sent back to us for the option number 4 there. And I remember going back and watching the planning commission discussion about it as part of our
Was this that
reevaluation.
It's a sign.
Was it a sign? Okay, I don't remember what it was.
It was your decision. I remember at the time, I remember at the time thinking, I don't know what the hearings board is gonna do with this exactly.
Oh, it's always, who knows?
Now there's a hotel behind Walgreens at Broad and Hawthorne.
I remember that.
He knows what brand of hotel it is.
Yeah.
Because there's no damn sign on it about the second floor.
I remember talking about it when it comes time to review sign ordinances. We need to do a lot of work on sign ordinances because it's kind of crazy. We've got a lot of sign things coming to the hearings board. And it was like
a cell phone with everything on it already. We don't need any signs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Why do I need to know what brand of hotel that is?
Yeah. I know, nobody's like looking at signs
around looking
driving by.
Behind the Walgreens.
Your hotel where you made a reservation and you might.
Better at finding directions.
Any other questions?
Everybody's using their phones.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the Planning Commission Chair's report. The chair does not have a report other than to, again, welcome our 2 newest members and bid farewell to our other newest member. Lovely to have you all here today and you 2 for hopefully longer. That's it for my Planning Commission Chair's report. Alex, you're up next, Future Land Use Steering Committee report.
We had a meeting on Monday. It was another good meeting. This one was at, let's call it Regional Hospital, Piedmont Hospital. And it was the large institutions in town, including Piedmont, University of Georgia, Clarke County School District, Athens Technical College. That is. Well, yeah, well, of course, y'all are at everything. But no, and them representing what they're are talking about their growth. It was a good conversation. We each had their 10-minute speech in a sense of their growth, what they're looking for. Interesting things that, one thing that just really stood out, because some of it is predictable, but the hospital, they need good traffic, ambulances coming in and out, things like that. Never would have thought of that. So it pays to listen once in a while. And so the committee, again, is just absorbing still. We're getting close to where we're going to start taking all this information and going and applying it. Next month will be housing. It's going to be exciting. You may want to come watch. Who knows where that one's going to go. But did I miss anything important for them to hear?
No, I totally agree. It was a good meeting. And I think the takeaway, if one of the practices that we're trying to make at the end of these meetings is to have a synopsis. What did we hear? And not to do that just to synthesize, but to do it so that we're pulling some lessons that are going to directly correlate to the future land use map. Like, what did we hear that we need to put on the map? So yeah, we heard that from the hospital about access. We asked all of the institutions specifically, what's helpful? What's a good helpful land use to be adjacent to that works nicely with your campus and your function? What are the things to avoid? And I thought we got some good responses. with regard to the growth of those institutions, which was sort of like, you know, the thing we were all waiting to hear. With rare exception, I think the answer was status quo. I think the answer was all of those institutions feel confident that their land holdings today, with a couple notable exceptions, which I'll talk about, but they all said that they're going to work color inside the lines. And I think that was important to hear. The school district, to their credit, did say over 20 years, that's a long time. So the construction of a new elementary school, maybe the need for a new middle school, maybe there is some sort of specialty school. There might be something that we haven't anticipated yet that may have to occur. So for them, I think we're talking about what are the land uses that are helpful to any school, whether it's the ones we have today or the new ones that are going to come. Let's think about it that way. And they had some good feedback. Athens-Tech, I think they want to grow, but they grow as a partner. Their campus isn't necessarily going to grow, but their presence with other industries is probably going to change. And they're doing a lot of things that we haven't seen Athens-Tech do in the decades prior, and it's pretty sharp. And then Andrew Saunders was there, and he talked about unified government, maybe starting to change the way it looks at things and do things differently. We may surplus some properties, but we also may repurpose some things for, he mentioned pocket parks, and he mentioned the notion of a West Side park is still a high priority. But again, those aren't surprises, but to hear those things said out loud as we're thinking about future land use was important. And housing will probably be 2 sessions at a minimum. Let me just say it will be 2 sessions at a minimum. So as you are able, I think that the invitation to come and listen, I think would be a really good thing for you all to be able to do.
Where's the schedule published? Is that on the website?
Well, okay. We've been aiming towards the last Monday, sometimes a Tuesday of each month, so that we can, 1, report to y'all, 2, that last week of the month, I guess the last week of the month, tends to be flexible. Like most things aren't scheduled in that time frame. There is no schedule like month to month, like through December, for that very reason. And it's because we have a membership of around 36 people that we're trying to corral and work with. So setting something in stone has been impractical, hasn't really worked.
Do you have the housing meeting scheduled? No, not yet. Okay.
I can make a point to send to this body that information so you're all aware. And just one other point for the good of this group, housing is supposed to be the last topic. Then there's going to be a little bit more discussion and then the map's coming to you all. So that's 3-4 months, just kind of ballparking where you guys might be seeing it. So if you guys are really interested in that discussion, housing and the overall discussion, now would be the time to come and attend and get prepared for it to come before this body.
Thank you. And yeah, if you would please let us know.
Yeah, I'll make sure. Yeah, my apologies for not doing that earlier. Yeah, but
They have fallen on, it's the oddest time, but it's when everybody likes it. Mondays, it's always been a Monday, but from 2 to 4. That's the weirdest time, but it works for all these people who kind of have control of their schedule better than a lot of folks. And it's usually the second to last or last Monday in general. But from there, it's Bruce and staff are getting the panels together, and it kind of that guides it a little bit.
That's all in person.
Yes.
All right, that brings us to the penultimate item, the planning director's report.
So I'll act like I'm giving a planning director's report. We have items pretty much guaranteed for September that are in the chute. So
3 already.
3 so far.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we'll see what happens with our comment only items from tonight, see where those land. Beyond that, I don't think we have much more to report to y'all, but happy to answer any questions you might have.
There hasn't been mayor and commission action on our previous agenda items, has there?
So the vote would be this coming Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah. And be one to watch.
That brings us to number 5, miscellaneous announcement. Does anyone have any? All right, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I'll make like a second. All in favor?
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned. You and I are.